and grab it. Our world is immersed in a galaxy of data. Data that connects us, hears us, enables us to do more. Data that helps us innovate wherever imagination takes us. In 1969, Apollo 11's guidance computer was limited to 72 kilobytes as it traveled to the moon. Now, we have exponentially more power in the palm of our hands. This precious resource demands a trusted partner to harness and make every bit of it intuitively accessible at the speed of our ideas. The speed of SQL Server and Azure SQL, the latest evolution of data management's highly secure, supercharged platform, enabling you to break performance barriers and boost agility. Azure SQL Database's hyperscale capabilities allow you to auto-scale dynamically. Advanced data security keeps hazards at bay with a single click, while built-in cloud intelligence eliminates worry. Machine learning services enhance the value of your data by importing adjacent code to create models faster than ever. And with cross-platform solutions like Azure Arc, SQL Server and Azure SQL products can be leveraged virtually everywhere. Our team is motivated to consistently improve this new breed of database without disrupting the application of our existing technology, as many of the world's critical systems and most influential corporations deploy it, and agencies on our most important front lines depend on it. Businesses like Balzano that leverage SQL Server big data clusters to help radiologists interpret medical images, or Zeiss that use Azure SQL Edge to constantly improve the manufacturing of optical lenses, and organizations that help us dream bigger, like the Sloan Digital Sky Survey that built its ever-expanding database of 200 million galaxies and 260 million stars on SQL Server. Imagine what your data could dream up. Imagine unparalleled access to that next great innovation. Together, we can reach it at the speed of SQL Server in Azure SQL. Imagine a tiny...
Well, as you can see from that video, SQL is everywhere you need it in new and exciting ways. Hello, I'm Bob Ward from Microsoft, live from the SQL Server and Azure SQL Conference. I want to stop for a second and pay special thanks. Shirley Brothers, Richard Campbell, the entire team here running this event, thank you wholeheartedly for giving us all the opportunity to be here in person and virtually, a true hybrid event. And a special thanks to the Microsoft Learn team. We are broadcasting live on Learn TV. Thank you, Microsoft Learn, for partnering with us today. Many of you that are here in person or online, you're going to have some questions. So I'm excited to tell you, immediately following this session, we're going to have a live Q&A interviewed by the Learn team. I'm also very excited to be joined today during this session by my colleagues, Buck Woody and Anna Hoffman. Together, it's our intention during this session to explain to you all the exciting ways you can use SQL from edge to cloud. We also hope to help explain to you when you might use these different ways of SQL Server and demonstrate ways of using SQL you've probably never seen before. Now, to get started in this discussion of SQL Edge to Cloud, it's probably no better way than do a little bit of a history. I've been here at Microsoft for 28 years, and in 1993, I was given these when I joined the company. And I said, what is this? It's not a save icon, by the way. They said, this is SQL. So, get going. Install this on a computer because we're a desktop database company. Like a desktop database company, I came from Oracle and Linux and all these systems. I need to have something more than a desktop database. But think of the evolution of SQL Server over the years. Starting in versions like SQL 7.0, we became very popular on department servers, known for ease of use and great price performance. But in the 2000s, we elevated ourselves to the enterprise space, doing things like record-breaking TPC benchmarks, again proving price performance was amazing against our competition. And as we moved further down into the 2000s in the last decade, we did really crazy things with SQL. We put it in the cloud. We were the first relational database platforms as a service in the cloud ever in the industry. And then we do something really crazy. We put SQL Server on Linux. And then SQL Server became known for not just a database, but a data platform with innovative technologies like machine learning and data virtualization. But all of it was based on a proven engine. Over time, we have demonstrated we have the best engine that powers all of this in the industry. So as you start this journey of SQL Edge to cloud, let's do this. Let's have a visual representation of the assets of SQL Edge to cloud. And then we intend in the rest of this session to kind of dive a little deeper into each of these and show you some really slick demonstrations. It all starts on the on-premises environment in the IoT Edge. Yes, SQL Server in an IoT devices on the edge. And then it transforms itself into your environments on premises or in virtual machines with SQL Server 2019, whether it's running on Windows or Linux. And in the Linux space, this opens up new possibilities with things like containerized applications or running SQL Server on Kubernetes. Now you jump to the public cloud, and you have things like Azure SQL Server running in Azure virtual machines, quick lift and shift operations, or even a full SQL Server platform as a service instance in Azure SQL Managed Instance. And then for new cloud-born applications, Azure SQL Database with the latest innovations like hyperscale and serverless. Now recently, we've had customers tell us, I need a bridge to these worlds. So we've announced something called Azure Arc, bridging the worlds of the public cloud and Azure down to the on-premises world in your environment with SQL Server on Azure Arc enabled servers and Azure Arc enabled managed instance. Now you're looking at this today online, or you're looking here in the room and you're going, I am blown away. How do I learn all of this stuff? I don't have the skills for this. You know you do. It's the same core engine that we use everywhere across the board. It's the same security, performance, and availability in the SQL engine that powers all of this. It's the same T-SQL language you know and love that exists from edge to cloud. So your skills in T-SQL apply everywhere. As a developer, all the modern languages are supported. We have the mantra of develop once, deploy anywhere, and that exists because it is the same core engine. And then finally, the tools you know and love, like Management Studio, or PowerShell, or command shells, and even new tool sets, like Azure Data Studio, or even in the Azure portal. Imagine using the Azure portal to manage everything you see on this slide. So let's do this. Let's take a journey into each of these a little bit, and then do some fun demonstrations. So it starts on the IoT Edge. Consider a company like 3M in manufacturing. They have this problem. They want to put IoT technology in their manufacturing devices. In fact, what they love to do is do data processing and machine learned prediction on the devices themselves because they have so much telemetry they're streaming. In many cases, these devices are not even connected to the internet or semi-connected. So that's their challenge. How do I put intelligence in the IoT device versus just a streaming device? Along comes Azure SQL Edge, a SQL Server engine with a small footprint that has things like time series built in, streaming, and even machine learning built and integrated with the engine in a containerized application. Or native movement to Azure. So if you do have results from these devices when you're connected, you can intelligently move those and do data intelligence and business intelligence in the cloud. But we noticed when we were doing this project that we were running through for SQL Edge, most of these IoT devices are running on ARM devices, some on Intel, mostly on ARM. Yes, SQL Server in a 500 megabyte footprint runs on an IoT ARM device. I never thought I'd see the day when SQL Server runs on a Raspberry Pi. But guess what? It's the SQL Server engine. Column store indexes exist in this engine. All the security features of SQL Server exist on this engine. And the idea that you could actually build an application now that could run on the edge, or that could actually run in SQL Server, or run in Azure SQL, develop once, deploy anywhere, is the promise of what we do with Azure SQL Edge. And 3M, again, being a great example of a company that has pushed down the ability to do prediction of machine failures in their environment by using the power of SQL Server. Now we flip the model now a little bit to SQL 19, our latest version of SQL Server re-released at the end of 19. I spent a lot of time in that calendar year. I keep telling everybody last year, but really that was actually a couple of years ago, right? And in that year, I spent the entire year on the journey talking to customers about this slide. Customers called this the camera slide. Why is that? Because everybody wants to take a picture of it. It's a visual representation of what we've delivered in the product, the hero features, the hero capabilities of SQL 19. You start in that top left-hand corner. What is that? Can SQL Server be an engine that powers your ability to query data and all of those icons, including Hadoop, and never move the data? That's exactly what data virtualization is. Or you'd like to spin up your own data lake with a big data cluster. including capabilities like machine learning in the environment itself. Or think about in the middle there. Imagine a world where you take a database backup on Linux and you restore it on the IoT Edge, or you restore it in the cloud, or you store it on containers or in Windows, and it's the same. The engine compatibility is the same across these platforms, and it truly gives you the power now to build your applications or deploy SQL and avoid a lot of translation or migration scenarios. Now, we need machine learning, and you're going to see some great demonstrations today of that. So we have an extensibility platform with the database itself. You can run your machine learning models with R and Python, and that type of thing exists today, by the way, not just on the IoT Edge, but in SQL Server and even in the cloud with Azure SQL Managed Instance. Look across the top right here. I remember in 2019, a famous quote from my colleague Travis Wright is like, Bob, that's not your grandpa's SQL Server anymore. I was worried he was referring to me with the grandpa comment, but actually I don't think that was the case. But then my friend Pedro Lopes said, Travis is a little bit right, but what's really true is the bottom here. It's the innovations in performance, security, and availability. And it all starts with intelligent query processing. How would you love to be able to take your app, make no code changes, and get faster? That's exactly what Bank et al. Did. Bank et al. Upgraded to SQL 19 in a test environment and saw a 90% increase in performance with no changes to their code. And they called us and said, what did you do? And we said, we improved the query processor to adapt to your workload and make things run faster. And that technology exists in the cloud, also in SQL Server. But you want to make sure you're secure and compliant. We introduced technologies like always encrypted with secure enclaves and data for classifications to help you with things like GDPR compliance. And then finally, a truly amazing story called accelerated database recovery that was born in the cloud first, but also now lived in SQL Server. And it basically saves the world from long recovery problems. How would you like to be in scenarios now where long recovery issues, long rollbacks do not bring down your business? That's the power of accelerated database recovery. You look in totality, what I've shown you on the screen right here, this is not just an engine anymore. It's powered by a core engine, but it is truly a data platform. And what better way to learn about what this platform can do than from a data scientist? So I'd like to bring Buck Woody on stage. Buck, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm so thrilled to be here. This hybrid event. Bob, don't go anywhere. I need you. I've got some cool stuff I want to. Some cool stuff. We're going to do the thing, but I got to show you.
We're going to do the thing.
It's great to be here in person. I'm wearing clothes again. That's awesome. It's good to see you in person, and those of you online, thrilled to have you here as well. We're here at Disney. Right, we're right here next to Disney. We're at the Swan and Dolphin Hotel, right next to Disney. So I know you told me that we were supposed to do some business meetings, but I went out yesterday and I was doing this cool thing. I took this cool picture. You like it? You like the picture I got there?
Sure.
Do you get it?
Yeah. No.
Woody and Buzz?
Oh my.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, you know what I thought? I thought, you know what I should probably do? I should probably go out and use our Azure Cognitive Services on this picture. And let me tell you what this is. So we've got a bunch of brainiacs from the planet Tron up in Microsoft Research. And they write all these cool algorithms for vision. They've got things for text. They've got things for speech. They've everything you can possibly imagine. And then what they do is you can send it stuff as an API call. Let me show you how that works. So I sent my picture, my cool picture there. I actually sent that up to the cloud. And I told it, can you predict what that is? And look, it found my face. It knows I'm a person. Well, it's pretty certain I'm a person. It knows there's a cartoon here. And it even got my age correctly. It guessed my age from a photo. Isn't that the coolest thing ever?
Yeah, Buck, that's really cool. Buck, this is a SQL keynote.
Oh, the SQL part. Yeah, okay. I should probably show you some code, I guess. You want to see some code? All right, I tell you what, why don't we do this? A lot of people know we have machine learning services built right into SQL Server. You can write R, Python, Java, even other languages. You know that that's in there. Yeah. So data scientists can actually write their code, create models, and score them or get the prediction back. You could do that, but you got to learn math and statistics and coding and Python and R and all that. And I guess some people really enjoy that, but other people are more involved just getting their work done every day. So they asked me, could you take that same thing you just did, like with that picture up to the Azure Cognitive Services, do no machine learning, but make a call out of my database up to that, get the answer, and put it back in my database? So you don't have to be a data scientist, but you can get the same predictions. Let's take a look. What I've got here is I've got a database called Analysis, and I'm going to look at my product reviews. And you can see here, there's a review here that says works fine for a certain product number, easy to install. Some reviews talk about not fitting wall plates, blah, blah, blah. All right, so here's what I did. I used the machine learning services that's in SQL Server, but I didn't write machine learning. I just called Python. I set up my keys and my contact up in Cognitive Services, and I said, take a look at this text and tell me if they think this is a good product or not. Because I want to get my sentiment, and maybe we make the product better, maybe we change something, maybe we make it cheaper, whatever we happen to do. So all I do is literally send that text up there with the same select statement, and if you can see here, it says this, overall sentiment, 75%. Now that's kind of interesting because it knew that that sentence had, oh, works great, but some people complain, so what does that mean? So it literally tore apart the sentence, gave me a complete score, just like you would tell me, yeah, they kind of liked it. But then it also tore apart each sentence and told me that sentence was positive, that sentence was negative. And it even returns how confident it is in that particular prediction. So I can now do machine learning in SQL, in a secure environment, without being a data scientist. I think you could even do this, Bob.
Maybe. I know SQL. Does that work? It sounds like, Buck, what you're telling me, though, as we've brought the power of machine learning down close to the database, so I can develop models all I want, even outside that scenario, but I can bring my models into SQL Server because it's close to the data.
That is correct.
And then SQL Server is optimized to understand how to work with these machine learning models together, so it's highly performant as well, I would guess,
Absolutely.
Right?
And
Awesome.
the data is secure, it stays right there, I can version them and everything else, or as we pointed out, you can call out and use somebody else's work. And as you know, I'm very good at using other people's work.
Well, a scary summary for that demonstration might be that I could be Buck Whitty.
You could be Buck Whitty.
Yeah, that would be scary.
Enjoy.
Buck, thank you so much. Thanks for your demonstration. I appreciate that. So we're on this journey, edge to cloud, right? We talked about IoT Edge, SQL Server. Now we talked about SQL 19, the power of SQL as a data platform. What about SQL Server Containers? That's a lot of people ask me about containers, why I should consider them. In fact, let me tell you an interesting story when you think about portability of SQL Server. At this event 2 years ago, I was talking about SQL Server Containers, and somebody from the back of the audience had a MacBook, and I'm using Windows 10 showing containers with Docker containers. And this person said, I got a question. I'm like, yeah, what's your question? He goes like, I'm not feeling the Mac love here. Like, I got a MacBook, and you've been talking about Windows, and I'm a Mac developer, you know, Linux, all that kind of stuff. You're talking about Linux containers. Show me the love. And I'm like, I'll tell you what. And I made this statement without actually knowing if it's going to be true or not. I said, I'm going to give you the SQL Server Mac Challenge. I will tell you that in 5 minutes on your MacBook, you can deploy SQL Server, deploy tools, connect to that SQL Server, and never use Windows. And they're like, yeah, right. And I'm like, hey, try it. And by the way, if I'm wrong, you can get on Twitter. You've heard of like the Twitter thing. You get on Twitter and say I was wrong. So I said this. I went back to my hotel room going, man, was I right about that? So I started getting up my machine with somebody else's MacBook to test it all out. And so the next day on Twitter, this person said, Bob Ward gave me the SQL Server Mac Challenge and he was wrong. I was like, oh man, I said this in front of hundreds of people. I'm terrible. He said I could do it in 5 minutes and I did it in 3 minutes. Now, what did he do? This person went and deployed a SQL Server Linux container because MacBooks support containers. And this person installed Azure Data Studio, and there's a native Mac version of that. This is a story of portability. It's the same SQL Server engine you can use on Mac, Linux, Windows, you name it. Anywhere a container can run, it can run it. Now, it's very lightweight. Today, look at this diagram right here. Imagine that square below was a virtual machine. Here's a myth. Containers replace virtual machines. Not true. Containers complement virtual machines. In fact, for SQL Server on Linux, this is how you run multiple instances of SQL Server. You run multiple containers inside a VM environment because you don't need a dedicated VM just to run SQL Server. Now, it's consistent because it's the same SQL Server image you know and love. And imagine a world now where you could get rid of your development servers. I'm sorry for developers online or on the phone, but DBAs don't like you. because you come onto a shared development server they're managing and you mess it up all the time. So instead of doing that, why don't you give your developers a specific version of SQL Server down to the cumulative update level and customize that image along with scripts and tools, package it together and tell a developer, go write your code against that. Let's all write against the same configuration of SQL, the same cumulative updates together, no more shared development servers. And then one of the hero stories of containers is what I call the switch method to patch SQL. You don't patch containers, you switch containers. Imagine a world where a SQL Server container, like on the screen here that's grayed out, was running SQL 19 CU something. And you want to go to the next CU. Well, you don't patch the current container. You just spin up a new container with the right CU you want. You point to the same set of system user databases, and within seconds, you have patched SQL Server. And you're saying to yourself, well, that doesn't sound that exciting. What if you need to roll back? You just switch back to the old one, and you're ready to go. So containerization for SQL Server is an amazing story, especially when you start combining it with the power of Kubernetes, an orchestrated way to run production containers. And if you'd like to consider how containers can help DevOps, when you get this deck, or you can go and do a search for last year's Build conference in 2020, I did a video, a demonstration of showing how to combine Azure DevOps and use containers in a declarative way with GitHub. So now we've talked about Edge. We've talked about 19. We've talked about containers. What about this Azure SQL thing? Why do we call it Azure SQL? This is a portfolio of SQL Server in the cloud, all the way from infrastructure as a service for SQL servers in VM. You're thinking about today, here online, here in this room, I need to get to the cloud fast. How do I do it? This is the fastest way. Think about taking an entire virtual machine image and just lifting and shifting this inside Azure, and then optimizing from there. Now, it could be, though, that you'd like this platform as a service concept. In fact, you would like to not have to worry about availability groups anymore. Wouldn't that be a nice story? But you need the power of the complete SQL instance. So you could go to Azure SQL Managed Instance if you'd like to do that. And that's what we provide you as part of that platform as a service story. Or your company right now is thinking about, we're going to build a new app, a cloud-born application. So what are your options, or what should you consider? Consider Azure SQL Database, where you're going to have a containerized database, but you're going to light up new innovations in the cloud with things like hyperscale and serverless technologies. This is the suite of Azure SQL. You have more control on the left-hand side, you have less control on the right-hand side, but you get more platforms as service, more management capabilities as you move to the right-hand side. But again, remember our story from the beginning. It's the same core engine running this technology. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of quickly compare some of the huge benefits of SQL Server versus PaaS. My colleague Anna Hoffman likes to summarize it this way. You can do a lot of this stuff in SQL Server, but you just got to configure it, and you got to manage it and monitor it. But in PaaS, we try to do as much as we can to automate things, to take away the burden of certain things. Like, consider the continuity and high availability and backup story. How would you like if we would put together for you an automated backup strategy where we back up everything automatically behind the scenes, we make it triple redundant, even geo-redundant across regions across the world, and then you keep backups around for 10 years and restore anytime you want? How would you like that kind of story? How would you like to build your own backup system doing that? Well, we manage it for you. I've seen customers try to go build those kind of same systems, and it works for them. And then somebody leaves the company, and they haven't documented what they did, so somebody tries to inherit what they did. Does this sound familiar? And how do I go manage and put that together? Well, guess what? We got your back. We're the ones doing this. And we power it with a service level agreement where we put our money where our mouth is. Or even geo-replication. I'd like to quickly spin up and the ability to replicate my current Azure SQL deployment around the world. We have that with things like geo-replication and auto failover groups. But the story doesn't stop there. You need to scale. You need to do it in an automated way. You'd like to build an application that we help you decide how to scale your cores as your worker loads increase versus you having to decide how many cores to pick. That is the promise of serverless technology in Azure SQL Database. What about advanced security? How would you like to be able to have the cloud notify you when there's a SQL injection attack in your environment? Or how would you like us to use best practices from the industry to do vulnerability assessments to see whether you might be subjected to problems in your environment? That is what Azure Defender for SQL is all about, and that exists today across our Azure suite. What about versionless? Wouldn't it be nice to get rid of patching? Like, wouldn't you like to free yourself? I was with a customer back before this entire pandemic hit in North Carolina, and we were having dinner together. We're nice dinner, we're talking about SQL and all innovations, and they said, we gotta go. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, we're having fun here, where are you leaving? Like, oh, we gotta go do our patching. They were gonna go spend all night in their environment, patching operating systems and patching SQL servers and make sure it all worked. And they said, I kind of heard that Azure thing might kind of help us here, and I explained to them the concept of versionless before they left, and they said, how do you come back and tell us this story? I did it virtually to tell them the story right after that, but they were sold. Or how about the power of this? Just today, we announced a new functionality called Query Hints, where you can go to the query store and use kind of like on plan guides, force a query in the query store to a different plan, a different performance capability, and we just announced that's for Azure SQL. So versionless gives you the latest and greatest technologies in the SQL Server engine. And then finally, built-in monitoring. You go and look at Azure SQL today and you don't know if you've got the monitoring tools you need, we have them. Plus we have new technology called SQL Insights. How about a perfmod-like experience across all your Azure SQL assets? And then how about built-in intelligence? If today developers are complaining that they don't know how to build indexes, we have automatic tuning for indexes in Azure SQL database. Now let's talk a little bit about additions for Azure SQL. You're having to make some choices and you're not sure what you get. You're used to buying Enterprise Edition, Standard Edition, Developer Edition, and you're quite sure whether we have what you need. So in Azure SQL Database and in Managed Instance, you have a choice called General Purpose. These are all declarative statements, by the way. You're not installing anything. You're just declaring what you need. And so you decide that for your workload, you just need the most standard, basic flavor of Azure SQL. That's why it's called General Purpose. We put things in Azure Storage. Think in terms of a failover cluster instance. Who here, raise your hand if you've ever had to deploy or manage a failover cluster instance. Okay, people in the back of the room like, yes, sorry, me. People online are like, me, I've done it. They're waving their hands like this now, right? How would you like it if you just declared, I want a general purpose service tier, and we just did that for you? We use the power of Azure Storage to make your shared storage capabilities. We integrate ourselves with the service fabric for failover decisions, and we just automatically fail you over in an instance-like fashion. But here's another power. You don't have to build a listener. It's all built into this environment. Now you're going to get general I/O performance because we're using Azure Storage, but it is going to light up some capabilities you get nowhere else, and that is serverless. And let's pause for a second and talk about that. What is serverless like? Why did I even think about that? You decide in your application with SQL Server that you decide to go to the cloud. So you're paying a subscription model for what you're using for SQL. But you know that in certain points of time, maybe like a constant time during the evening, you don't even use the thing. So you're like, look, I don't want to pay Microsoft when I don't use this. Can't you help me? So we have something called auto pause in serverless. You start coming along, use your database, and then at 1 in the morning, nobody touches it. And then it picks back up again at say 4 in the morning. During that 3-hour window, you're not billed for any compute time that we use. We pause your SQL server to make that successful. And you get a primary replica, just like a failover cluster instance. So then you can kind of up your game. You're going to pay a little bit more, but you're going to up your game because you need business critical needs. We are going to store your databases on local storage. And then I'm going to show you in a second here, we're going to build an amazing architecture using availability groups. So we're going to give you the highest redundancy recovery that you need. But we're also going to give you the lowest latency. So if you're a latency sensitive I/O application, you got to take a look at business critical. That's why it says IOPS++. Anna Hoffman calls this the Yelp style of comparing these choices. And if you need MMLTP, Hackathon technology, this is where you're going to land as well. Now notice the P's and the S's and the R's. P is for your primary replica. The S's are for your secondary replicas, and R is for a read replica. We'll show you in a second, from an architecture point of view, how we weave these technologies together. Finally, in Azure SQL Database, we've unlocked incredible innovation called hyperscale. Let's say today you have a 70 terabyte database, and you need read scale with it. And you're like, you guys cannot build a compute in a VM that matches my needs. And like, no, we can. And it's called hyperscale. What we've done is built a tiered architecture of caching so that you can take an extremely large database, and even though the buffer pool will not match that, we cache things in certain layers so that we meet your performance needs. And we take the loggings and decouple it from the actual compute of the engine to feed changes into these caches and to feed changes into possible replicas. So look at the diagram now below. There are 4 R's. What are the R's? That's where you get read scale. It's an amazing set of technologies that you can use. In fact, if you think about companies that are out there today, I'll start from right to left. ClearScale is a company that told us exactly that. I am going to grow my database needs, and you got to scale with me for my read workload. How do I do that? We said, okay, we'll set up your database and maybe pick 1 read replica, which they did. And then they started growing. We're like, dynamically just add another. And yes, that's true. Dynamically add another, and you just scale with it, up to 4 replicas. Here's the other cool story that we told ClearScale, because they had 70 terabytes of data. They're like, hey, we're kind of worried about backup here. I mean, that's a lot of data to back up. How are you going to do that? Because of the fact that we put your data on Azure storage, we can use snapshot backup technology to totally make the application oblivious we're doing backups. And to even make it even more interesting, ClearScale is like, how am I going to do a point-in-time restore of 70 terabytes? Isn't that going to take days? Minutes. Because we're using snapshots, we can go behind the scenes and restore. In fact, I've seen demonstrated before a 40 terabyte database restored in 7 minutes. That is with the power of something like hyperscale. AccuWeather, another good example of a company that needed just a database. They're like, look, we really can't afford to manage these SQL servers anymore, but as it turns out, we really just need the database part of all of this. And so they made a migration to move several of their databases into just Azure Database. H&R Block is even a cooler story. It's the story of the lift and shift we talked about. They said, we got to get to the cloud fast. So some of our VMs of older SQL servers, we want to put those in the cloud very quickly. We said, okay, go to VM. And then they were looking at VM and they said like, well, that managed instance thing sounds cool. I'd love to have that auto backup story. How do I do that? And so they put some of their other databases in managed instance. It's a great example of companies that are not just choosing one Azure SQL option versus the other, they're picking all 3 options to meet the needs of where they are in their journey to the cloud. So you may ask yourself as well, this sounds interesting from an engine perspective. I see the value of what you're talking about, but is there more? Yes, there's more. This is the value of the cloud. Azure Defender, I mentioned a little bit briefly already, the fact that you just declare, I want Azure Defender. And by the way, that technology exists across all Azure resources. But specifically for SQL Server, we've demonstrated before the ability to proactively tell you and alert you to things like injection attacks or suspicious activities to try to intrude and get into your database. How about if somebody's trying to maliciously log in to your Azure cloud resources and you want to know about it? We can detect that with machine learning technology. We just recently announced at Microsoft Build an exciting new technology called Azure SQL Database Ledger. How would you like to bring blockchain technology down inside the SQL engine in a centralized fashion? Because today, maybe the decentralized way of blockchain is not meeting your needs. That is Azure SQL Database Ledger. Check that out. That's just announced at the Microsoft Build conference. I'm really excited to see where that lands for us for new applications that need that immutable blockchain type technology. And then I kind of briefly mentioned before, we announced preview for this early in the spring. I would love a perfmon experience across like all my Azure SQL assets. I'd like to see visualizations across virtual machine, managed instance, databases, SQL Server, availability groups, replicas. And by the way, I would love it if you build it in such a way that I could customize it and consume it outside your portal. That's what SQL Insights is all about, using the power of technologies like Telegraph and Grafana in a monitoring machine to monitor your assets and give you information outside that SQL environment. And then finally, we talked about intelligent performance. I just mentioned an example of query hints to you already that we just announced today, and definitely take a chance to check out automatic tuning with indexes or the whole suite of intelligent query processing. It is our intention to make SQL Server an intelligent engine continually in the cloud and also land that in SQL Server. Well, hey, I think there's any better way to kind of think about what Azure SQL Databases is from a new application point of view than to bring on stage the host of Data Exposed, Anna Hoffman. Anna, come join us on stage.
Thanks so much, Bob. I'm excited to be here. Hey, folks. So for this demo, let me just get this set up. But Bob, I don't know if you know this, but I actually like to go for a run every morning. Let me just close some of Buck and Woody tabs.
Yeah, I think you passed me when I was walking yesterday morning. Yes.
So I like to go for a run every morning, and especially here at Disney, I've been logging those runs in an application. Now, this is a simple fitness tracking application. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this type of application. So I'm going to go ahead and log into this application, and what you can see is just some various runs from my time here at Disney. Now, I can even go ahead and start a new workout, and I want to be clear that while I'm running or doing my workout actively, we're not sending any data anywhere. This is going to help me in conserving my battery. However, when I end my workout, what we're going to do is we're going to send that data to Azure to be stored and processed. So if I hop over to the Azure portal, what you're going to see here is a hyperscale database like Bob has talked about. This database is currently 13 terabytes in size, and it can grow as needed. So this is supporting my production application with all its users and all their information. Now, part of the processing that we wanted to do for users is around when the workout actually ended. I was guilty, as well as many of our users, of forgetting to click the end workout when I was done with a run. So what we've done is we've added some processing to help predict when the workout is run. As a simple example, I'm just going to manually update one of my runs from yesterday. And hopefully that runs. We can make sure we're connected. Oh, man. Okay. That's unfortunate. Okay, so in theory, we would, sorry. Let me see. This is unfortunate. My IP address changed when I moved rooms, so I no longer have access to this database. But when we update our application or update our items, we only want to update the things that have changed in our application. Now, with Azure SQL, we're leveraging the same SQL engine, so this allows us to take advantage of things like change tracking. Now, change tracking is going to allow me to basically create a change table and track changes from a specific version. So this means I can then construct an API which is going to return JSON and return only the information I need. Here you can see I can specify that JSON query and the information that I want returned. Now, this is part of the beauty, is that I actually get to specify how I want that JSON returned. So this is going to help me in implementing in my application. As a simple example to see of how this might work, we can go into a tool called Insomnia and track some of our changes. So for example, if I simply select a version, so I can go back to 159 and a user ID, I can see the specific changes and only those changes that have happened. For example, an update or an insert. This means I'm not having to pull all of the data to and from my phone application, and in a time where phone battery is everything, is very important. So with this simple exercise, you've seen how Azure SQL Database, and in this case, the hyperscale service tier, is going to allow you to take advantage of all the Azure SQL Database features and functionality while getting some of the extra benefits like limitless storage with a 13 terabyte database, as well as some added benefits around read scale and size of data operations. Now, this is great for production, but I'm also working on some updates to my application. For example, if I go over to VS Code, what I'm actually doing is I'm going to go ahead and push up some changes to GitHub. This will kick off a GitHub action as well as a build. So while that's building, I can show you what I pushed up. So we saw earlier here, I have this stored procedure, but what I want to do is start adding temperature to my data collection. This way, I think maybe we can find some correlations or analysis around the humidity, the temperature, and how that affects my workouts. So what I've done is I simply had to add two scripts. One script, which is going to add the temperature column to my data table, and another script to update that stored procedure to also return the temperature as a result. So we already pushed that up to GitHub. So what I can do is I can come in to GitHub and I can see, one, that I've gone ahead earlier and configured my development environment. So you can see scripts 1, 2, and 3 were run on my Azure SQL database. And if I go into GitHub Actions, I can see this new GitHub action has kicked off. And what we're doing is we're running a build and we're going to go apply the extra scripts on our database which have not been run yet. Now, while this is running, it takes just a few minutes. I wanted to show you what database I'm using. Believe it or not, I'm not actually going to use that 13 terabyte copy of that hyperscale database for my development workloads. However, I need a database that's going to contain the same features and functionality of that hyperscale database. So for this, I'm using a serverless database. Serverless is going to be great because I'm not using this application all the time. I'm not developing or working on this application all the time. So what I can do is do things like set an auto pause delay of 1 hour. So after 1 hour of inactivity, we're actually going to pause the database, and during that time, I'll only be billed for storage. This is really going to help me keep my dev costs low. Now, if I take a look at the metrics, what you're going to see is over time, I'm actually only being billed for what I actually use from a CPU or memory perspective. This means if I'm not using the database, I'm not being billed for CPU. So this is huge cost savings. Now, finally, if we go back to GitHub Actions, we can see that the build has completed and scripts 4 and 5 have been added. So with tools like serverless databases and GitHub Actions, we can really increase the performance and efficiency and lower costs of our development workloads. So overall, what I hope you've seen today is how Satya says that Azure is the world's database, or sorry, the world's computer, but we think SQL is the world's database. Thank you.
Awesome. You know, Anna, what I love about your demonstration is the fact that you showed a production database with like 13 terabytes in hyperscale that provide read scale for your application needs, but then you shifted and showed me how you'd used a copy of the database in a serverless environment to save you money while you're developing and integrated with technologies like GitHub in a true DevOps fashion. That's not SQL Server and diskettes anymore, folks. That is a true modern way to build and run SQL Server. Okay, so today in this room, today live, you're thinking to yourself, I do run SQL Server today, and I'm thinking about migration, but I really don't even know where to start. Look at the top right-hand corner of this slide. First of all, the aka.ms data migration site is absolutely your one-stop hub to learn how to migrate. It includes every possible data source you can imagine for SQL and every possible target you might want to migrate to. But here's some tips, and here's a vision of where we're headed to help you make it easier to migrate SQL Server. First of all, Azure Migrate can be used today as a one-stop place to discover and assess your SQL assets. We announced a preview this spring at Ignite, the ability to run something called an Azure Migrate VMware appliance. Imagine taking technology in your environment now and discovering and assessing thousands of SQL servers, finding out exactly what they actually look like, getting an inventory of those in Azure Migrate, but then also monitoring the performance of your workload in these machines and giving you estimations of cost and estimations of what is the right deployment method you should be using with possible migration blockers. It is our intention to extend that technology to everywhere SQL Server runs today, whether that be bare metal servers, Hyper-V, Azure VM, or even other cloud environments. Now, we've also announced recently a preview of an inline experience with Azure Data Studio. So let's say you have a SQL Server today that you just know you're going to migrate. I just want to go do it. And I'd like to do that in an online fashion. You can do that inside a wizard experience with Azure Data Studio, which is really powerful because it allows you to kind of query both environments within the same tool as you're going through the migration experience. We've had customers tell us that migration is great. I love the tools you're providing. I got to do that online. I need almost zero downtime for this experience. We have the tools you need. Azure Database Migration Service or the new Log Replay Service can allow you to use log shipping technologies behind the scenes to migrate your SQL Server in a continuous fashion and then cut over and make the necessary application changes to direct your app to the new Azure SQL Managed Instance or VM environment. So if you think about the journey we've made, notice the little dots at the bottom of the screen. That's what we call breadcrumbs. We are now at the very last phase of that journey because we've talked about the Edge, 19, Linux containers, and the public cloud of Azure SQL. But I mentioned to you, we needed a way to connect these worlds. Customers told us, like Ford, we need a way to take the power of Azure and run it in our environment. Can you do that? Can you give us Azure services? Can you connect us either in a direct way or in a semi-connected way to Azure so that we could view our Azure assets in one way? We could actually get billed for SQL Server in a way like Azure bills us and see that billing in the cloud. Or can you put intelligence of Azure in our environment? In fact, is it possible for you to take the power of Azure SQL Managed Instance, auto backups, auto DR, evergreen version of the SQL Server, and I can run it in my data center. That's what Azure Arc is all about. Versionless, scale, and unified management. Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance and Azure Arc Postgres are in preview today. We'll continue to iterate on those technologies in this calendar year. We are using the power of Kubernetes, any Kubernetes that you want to put on in your environment, to do this technology. So that's a way of bridging these technologies, but don't forget, it's the same SQL Server engine we're deploying everywhere. Now, this particular slide is not meant for you to read here in this presentation. Where are all the check marks, Bob? I don't get it, right? What we did is we sat back and said, for all these edge to cloud scenarios, what should you use during certain situations? When does it make sense to use Edge? When does it make sense to use Azure SQL Managed Instance? What about containers? So we lined up some scenarios on the left-hand side, and we lined up our products on the right-hand side. A little bit of work in progress. Maybe we'll just write a paper on it someday. Maybe we'll write a tool on it someday. Here's the interesting part. You're going to go look at something like this later when you get this deck. And you're going to go, you know what? I don't just need one of these. I need like many of these. Most of our customers today are not making one choice. They're making a choice in multiple scenarios because today's modern applications require multiple scenarios. But in your mind, you got to go back to think the same T-SQL language, the same engine for security, performance, and availability. What about the future? Where are we heading? That's pretty interesting, Bob, what we're doing today. It is our intention to unify SQL across your environment and the cloud. You're going to continue to see us iterate like on that Arc story. How do we bring together the power of Azure and let you control where SQL runs? Run it in the public cloud, run it in your environment. And so you'll continue to see us innovate in this space. You saw a great example of Anna showing you a modern developer experience with Azure SQL Database. We will make this even better. We intend to solve new development problems and invest more in languages, things like JSON, Graph, and IoT technologies, all using the power of SQL. And then you saw a demonstration we talked about several times about hyperscale and serverless. We didn't even mention elastic pools. In the Azure database world, we want to double down on that technology. Imagine a world where you just say, I want a database. That's all I want. Give me a database. And we just did all this behind the scenes. We made it serverless, made it scale, and it just works for you. And the security is still a critical part. SQL Server continues to be the least vulnerable database on the planet 10 years running. So we always will invest in this space. We're going to double down on things like enclaves with always encrypted technology. We want to integrate with things like Azure Purview to help you do least privilege type access to SQL Server. And then we talked about already the idea of bringing blockchain to the power of SQL with something like Ledger. And so think about this bottom comment down here. Not the engine, but a modern data platform on premises in the cloud. So we continue to increase our investment in intelligence in things like virtualization, analytics, and machine learning. All of this represent the future is what we're doing in Azure SQL Edge to Cloud. Now, why not provide you some resources? I'll leave this up here for a second because I have a few minutes just left here to talk about this because we always also want to give time for great opportunities for our interview, but let's talk about them some. You want to learn more. First of all, at the top right-hand corner, and we'll leave this up for you, those who are online and here in this room, this is where the deck is. I'm an open source presenter. Have you ever heard that term before, open source presenter? So take this deck and use it in your own organization. Go teach your companies what is possible for SQL Edge to Cloud. So the deck is already there. Many of the demonstrations that we show you are in this location, and Anna's code that she showed you, the entire code example is on GitHub in that location. Now let's say you want to get started with Azure SQL Edge. The link at the very top is a way to quickly get started. Many people ask me, I need to build some code pretty quickly to kind of play around with this. Here's a quick tip. Did you know that you can go build an IoT Edge application with SQL in Azure VM? You can simulate what it's like to have like a Raspberry Pi device, but get the developer experience yourself, all using Azure technologies. Now you may be asking yourself, I got to do a container and I don't even know how to do this. So we have many training documents for you, but Azure AKMS SQL Containers is an easy way to get started to build them. The other thing you're trying to do is you're trying to find out where are the right training from my organization. Guess what? Don't hire a training organization anymore. Or if you are a training organization, go to AKMS SQL workshops. This is a complete set of workshops across everything we've talked about today, but not built by a third-party company, built by us in the engineering team. We want to show you all the right things from our perspective of how to learn these products. Now, you also have heard about Azure SQL this week already, and you heard me talk about it today. And you're thinking to yourself, Bob, I've seen your SQL 19 workshop, and it's pretty easy to take SQL 19 on my laptop and go do it for free. But how would you like to do this for free with Azure? Go to Azure SQL Fundamentals. You can use the Microsoft Learning Path, our partners again from the Learn team, and you get a free Azure sandbox to train completely on Azure SQL Database. There is a certification called DP300 from Microsoft for relational databases in the cloud. It was not Anna and I's intention for this to be directly correlated with that certification. We have had dozens, no, maybe even hundreds of people tell us, I took your training and I passed the certification. If you're trying to find a way to get experience in the cloud, sometimes certifications are a way to talk to your company or other companies about how to do that. Now you want to make sure you know how to migrate. We already mentioned this once, but let's reinforce it again. Your company's thinking about migration, you don't know where to start. Start with the data migration hub. We continually, and I've seen the emails within our company on this, we innovate and integrate and update that all the time to make sure you have the latest and greatest on the processes and the tools you need. Now you want to keep up to date with what's going on. I mean, I threw a lot of stuff at you today. For those folks online, you're like, I can't keep up with y'all. You innovate so fast for us, what are we going to do? Well, guess what? Follow @AzureSQL handle on Twitter. Marisa Brazil, who happens to be in the back of this room, she's like behind the scenes, the power of what we do. I've never seen anybody more devoted to keeping people up to date using that. But maybe you like videos, you like YouTube. You're like, you know what, I kind of like to watch some bite-sized videos. Look at our YouTube channel. It started with this crazy journey last summer with some 60+ videos about Azure SQL. It has exploded so fast. How would you like to see interviews almost on a weekly basis with members of the SQL team hosted by Anna Hoffman, where she interviews them and they do demonstrations and show you about the latest visions of SQL Server and Azure SQL. That is what we call our Azure SQL Digital Conference on YouTube. And also it's part of our Data Expose show. In fact, if I think correctly, I think there's going to be a Data Expose show tomorrow live from this conference somewhere. I may have to pop in and kind of like video bomb that thing, right, when it's going on. You know, in SQL Server team and the Azure SQL team, we actually write some books. Can you believe that? You want to go learn more about our technologies in a book way? You can read these books on Linux, SQL 19, Azure SQL, and even a really great book by several members of our team about how to build new applications with Azure SQL. I can't believe I'm even actually saying this. I started this entire session today by thanking Shirley, by thanking Richard, by thanking members of the team for organizing this event as an in-person hybrid event. Well, get ready. In December in Las Vegas, we are back to full bore with SQL Server Azure SQL Conference and DevIntersection. And you can bet that the SQL Server team is going to be there in force. And I'm sure there's going to be some incredible new and exciting technologies. So let's review what we started today. We started today with a vision from a video. And then I told you this incredible story about the save button that I received back in 1993. And that transformed into a vision and a reality of SQL Server running on Raspberry Pis, on SQL Server running on Linux containers, on machine learning demonstrations, on SQL running in public clouds that accelerate and optimize and save you time and money, and even on scenarios where we bring the power of Azure to your environment with Azure Arc. SQL Edge to Cloud, we believe SQL is everywhere you need it, and we hope you come along this journey with us. We look forward so much to spending more time with you. And with having said that, it might be a great opportunity to stop even right now a little bit earlier than we even planned. And how about an interview? Would you like to do see a live interview here on stage of this conference? Have you ever seen anything like that? But Buck's going to be up here, so I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm going to transition to come down out front here. I think we'll do a little interview with the Learn team. Let's go do it.
Sounds great. Thank you for that. So during your presentation, we had a lot of great questions, a lot of questions online, and I'm sure many people in the room have some questions. So the format of this for the next half hour, again, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Scott.
I'll ask some questions from something that's been submitted online, and while they're answering that, if anyone in the room has a question, just get my attention and I'll bring the mic over to you.
You're gonna be like the Richard Campbell where you run around with the mic. I like that.
No.
I like that.
I could never be Richard Campbell. Let's make that very clear.
Okay, all right, Scott.
All right, so let's start with David says, if I'm starting the development of a new cloud app, which Azure SQL which SKU should I use? General purpose, hyperscale, or critical business?
Sure, I can take that one. I mean, Classic answer, it depends. But if you're just getting started and you're just playing with it, I recommend starting with general purpose. However, the caveat I'll put on that is if you use the Microsoft Learn Sandbox, you can deploy any of those SKUs in Azure SQL Database and see what they're actually like and do all your testing, do all the stuff that you need. But most of our customers today are running on general purpose and not having any issues.
Nice.
All right. So Eric here in the audience has a question about licensing.
Licensing.
Ooh.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
That's you.
Oh, it was me. Sure.
This is great, but I got to make sure my boss says, how much more is this going to cost me? So is there a place I can go and give some stats, or here's
Sure.
cost differences, things along those
I'll take a
lines?
shot at that. Is that okay, guys? Okay. So first of all, we do have a pretty good licensing guide for SQL Server itself. So SQL Server, including like containers, things of that nature. That guide gives you all the details for SQL Server. Of course, Azure SQL is a subscription-based offering where you're paying per compute and storage and so forth. But here's a nice tip for you, and Anna, why don't you chime in as well? You ever heard of Azure Hybrid Benefit? This is you taking existing SQL licenses and applying them to cloud subscriptions to save you money. You have some other thoughts about that. How do you get that Azure Hybrid Benefit thing?
Yeah, in addition to Azure Hybrid Benefit, which you can get using your existing SQL Server licenses, it's very easy. It's just a checkbox when you're selecting the SKU. You can also get reserve capacity, which is a way to prepay in advance and get a significant discount. Scott, I think we also had a question up here.
Before we go to that, just to follow on with that, on the cost side, there are cost estimators built right in when you go to the Azure portal. And you can get sliders and predict things. Also in the migration assistant, there's a whole bunch of tools in there that will take a trace of your workloads and tell you if you do this, this is what it looks like. So you can do an intelligent comparison. In some cases, the on-prem system may be cheaper. In other cases, the cloud may be cheaper. It's more about functionality than the specific cost. If you get what you need, then you're in good shape. And I think we had a question here.
Yeah, let's go online.
Okay,
for a minute,
he's
and
going to
then-
switch online to in person.
Online
Cool,
person.
Scott. Sounds
Yep.
good to us, man.
So while you're talking about money, there's a question on serverless.
Yes.
What happens when you try to connect to a serverless database and it's paused?
Sure, I can take that. So if you try to connect to a serverless database when it's paused, the first connection attempt will fail. As we connect the storage and the compute back together, this usually takes about 30 seconds. One thing to keep in mind is that you are starting with a cold cache since SQL Server was essentially off.
But I guess the billing, Anna, right, is that you were paused, so you didn't pay for compute, right?
Exactly.
But then when you start going, I guess you pay, if you don't use it, you pay for min compute. You have a min range, right? And then you just pay what you use. Is that
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
I mean, that's the definition of serverless, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So the retry logic is important.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
All right, Duke has a question live in the audience here.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the data science cognitive service, so I talked to a lot of folks, data engineer like eBay, PayPal, or Costco. So when we do the search on their website, they cannot search the right product.
Okay.
So we have to go to Google and search the product.
I see.
Yeah, so I think because they told me using Microsoft Azure is difficult. It's not there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so can you explain that?
Yeah, so the question was around searching on your own content. You want a Google or a Bing in your own environment. And so what you're looking for is Azure Cognitive Search. And so if you take a look at that, there's lots of documentation around that API. For a specific difficulty or something like that, I'd recommend we just take a look at the actual workload. But in general, that service has been improved a great deal. They may not have looked at it in a while.
Okay, Anna, this next question is about your demo. Can you talk about the differencing tool that came back? You had a select statement specifically on a version, like 191 or something. How do you get just the last diffgram?
Yeah, exactly. So I think what you're asking is how can you get the latest updates and only the latest
Yeah,
updates?
something happened. Tell me what it is.
So the way that we did that is by using something called change tracking. And this is something available in the SQL engine, not just Azure SQL Database. But that's going to allow us to, what we showed in the demo was actually how you can create a change table. And from that change table, we can specify, hey, for this user from a specific version, only give me the latest updates. Now what you saw is we actually were using an API to hit that stored procedure and return the results. So that's how we were able to show visually exactly what has been updated or inserted or that sort of thing. And hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Deidre over here, live in the audience, has a question as well.
What if you start out with general purpose and then you find that you need business critical, but is that easy to transfer? And then what if you start with business critical because your boss told you to, and you realize to save money, you need to go to general purpose? Is that easy to do?
Yeah, Deidre, first of all, do what your boss says, right?
Yeah.
So big important tip for you. Here's the great story between those. It is a simple deployment choice, either through the portal or even T-SQL. To make those choices, there is no migration required. Now, it depends on the choice and the changes you're making and the size of your database. So like, for example, general purpose, if it's a huge database, I got to go business critical, I got to get all those replicas going, right? But the other cool story that we have here is that the actual downtime is short, because we try to go make a new deployment for you and then we switch you at the last second. But it's a declarative choice and it's actually really easy to make. So, Anna, is there any other thoughts? Or that's kind of like
I think that makes sense. The only thing I would add to that is if there are scenarios where sometimes you need business critical and sometimes you need general purpose, because of this seeding stage, which is a size of data operation, it might make sense to implement some sort of automation. So you could use something like Elastic Jobs, which supports Azure SQL Database, to say, hey, we know during this time we really need that business critical database, so we're just going to implement some logic. So that might be a way if you kind of need both to kind of avoid. But yeah, if you're switching a lot and there's a lot of data, then there will be a time associated with that.
But Deidre, let me add on a comment here. So I think it's really important. We try to do this as much as we can to explain these tiers, right? What they give you. So to be clear, general purpose is going to be more for general workloads, reasonable I/O performance, lower cost, but you get things like serverless. But remember, you still get built-in availability. You got like a failover cluster instance in this environment. That may be fine. So what Ann and I oftentimes do when they talk about this comparison is what is your RTO and RPO needs? You got to go look at those kind of type things because business critical might be required to meet that. That may be alone the reason why you make that choice.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. So this one's a little different, right? We're hybrid, so we're both online and in person.
Okay.
I took a stab at answering this question online. So I'm going to ask you the question, but I'm also going to provide you my answer.
Oh, nice.
Because
so Scott, we get to test you then.
That's
right. Part of this.
We
Lovely.
can just leave.
See you later.
All right, this is hybrid, right? So, okay. Terry Wilson online says, I'm not sure I still understand why I should use SQL Server with machine learning. Okay, so that's the scope. My answer was, just like a stored procedure, we're building logic on the server. So we're letting the server do something.
Yeah.
And I then continued to say, like anything, this could be used for greatness or could be abused. So I'm sure there's some lines in there. But a key advantage is that you can do machine learning where the data lives inside the database, which eliminates the need to sort of move my data somewhere else and then bring it back.
Yeah, that's you've nailed it. There's a couple of primary reasons. Yeah, nicely done.
Scott, are you a data scientist?
I've got a session on this right after the lunch break, and so you can come give it. So the general idea is when you use machine learning on top of SQL Server, you're not moving the data around the network. So there's a performance hit there, which is awesome. But the other thing is there's a security profile. You're not having to move it off of the server. There's a secure channel right on the server that lets the Python, R, or Java, or language work interactively with the data. You simply do a select statement past that, and it returns a data set, which is very nice as well. Another thing that's kind of interesting to keep in mind is that you've now got a separation of duties. So I let my database administrator control who has access to the data sets. And I let my data scientists create their model on a representative data set, but they never get to see the real data. They can see a representation of that data, but I can fudge numbers and so on. Then when I run it in the real system, I can now score it against data. And the interesting thing there is I could even say, for instance, Bob wants to call that stored procedure and see a certain amount of data, and Anna's got more privileges because she's better at her job. And so what I want to do is I want to punish Bob by not letting him see as many rows. He won't be able to score whether he's in the right percentile for his salary as Anna and I are, because we obviously make a lot more than he does.
Hey, one thing to add from a DBA perspective, and I've chatted with these folks about it, who are the true data scientists, I'm the DBA guy, is that I've had some customers get nervous about letting Buck Woody run their Python code on their SQL Server, like they don't really want to do that. So resource governor is tied into this. You can control the resources that this stuff runs from a CPU, memory, and even a affinitization perspective. So I can actually limit Buck, which is a good idea, on what he can run as Python on my SQL Server.
Yeah, as you answered that, I have an application development background, and so I start thinking about the permissions of who has access to what Is that governed by identity in the connection string? So when I
No,
go
it's
to
literally SQL Server. So the same thing you do today in SQL Server, you do there. You can go fine-grained, even down to row level or column level security. Or if you're using programmatic security, it follows the same model. So for you as the developer, it's just dead simple. You just call a stored proc, goes intos and goes out ofs, and then you get your answer back and you're done.
Nice. Can you elaborate on the job role that you talked about? Because I imagine now, if I'm a database administrator that I've been working on this my whole life, am I now expected to become the data science? Like, I think I might know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear you elaborate on what does SQL Server actually do to get an answer from a model?
Yeah.
It's an HTTP request, or do I have to? Like, how does that actually work?
Yeah, we have an extensibility framework, it's called. It's built right into the engine. There's a secure channel that allows the SQL Server engine, which does what it has always done, to simply send out a set of requests. Works slightly different in Linux and Windows, same end result. There's a series of processes that allows a separate and independent machine learning service to run and do the scoring and do the R work or the Python work or the Java work and transfer that back. No HTTP requests, no weird endpoints, no security things that you have to do that are special. So it's totally within the stored procedure or transact SQL code.
Okay, cool. That's great. Keep your questions coming live in the audience. We'll go somewhere else online, back over to Learn TV. So Ada asks, containers and Kubernetes are hot topics in the industry. When should I consider using this for SQL?
Okay, I'll take a first stab.
Yeah, you take first stab. Yeah, you go for it.
So, we kind of alluded a little bit on the slide there a little bit. One great scenario is for developers. Again, we talked about a dev server, a SQL server that developers share. I like to use that to kind of start with, even though containers can certainly run in production. That's what we'll talk about the Kubes comment in a second. But again, imagine a world where your developers are all sharing a SQL server and they're just mucking it up. Give them a container image of SQL Server and scripts and stuff in their environment, Linux, Mac, Windows, and let them all develop off a consistent image, even in DevOps scenarios. Now you're like, well, I like that container concept. We talked about the patching, right? You could switch containers to patch SQL Server. I love this idea. It's pretty cool. I want to run it in production now. Well, what if you got like 100 of these things to run? That's where Kubernetes comes in. And in fact, a great example of running containerized production SQL servers is not just SQL Server Big Data Cluster, but our new Azure Arc offering. So containerizations have that portability, lightweight, consistency, great less downtime story. If you're not using, let's say, public cloud services, and then for production container applications, including SQL, Kubernetes is the best way to host it. Buck, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The container story for developers is the prime case that you'll see. I've got Anna, and she's developed something, and she says, I want you to try this, or I want to give you my application. She has to be concerned about what version of SQL I'm running, what version of Python I have, what libraries I have loaded, all kinds of things. Or she can simply say, there's my container registry, type this code, and you'll have it in less than 3 minutes. So that's just unbeatable for that. Then the portability side is actually big for me. As you pointed out, I can show someone on a Mac running SQL Server on a Mac in a container, and there's nothing changed. It works. It's the regular stuff inside SQL Server. So now I'm running in a Mac world, or maybe I want to do it in Linux, and while you can install SQL Server full up in Linux, maybe I still want that portability. Maybe I want to run it in some lesser cloud.
Right.
And maybe I want to run it there, and they all have container services. Maybe I want to spin that up on the Azure cloud. So many places containers can run, even on Raspberry Pi. So this portability can't be underestimated. And you also want to think about that isolation. Like I said, Anna can give me a complete environment. Data scientists have been using this forever to get Python, because Python's just a mess with all the libraries and versioning and all that. And they're like, oh man, just bundle this up. And so now we can do that with the database as well.
Here's another thing for a tip for you that asked the question on Learn TV. How would you like to actually pull down an image of this container? You do it offline, and then you start it, and you've installed SQL Server in 2 seconds. It's a pre-deployed version of SQL. There's no installation required.
No installation.
The deployment experience is amazing.
Yep.
One of the things that you mentioned in your talk to elaborate on the containers is a rollback scenario.
Yes.
That has a lot of dangers in my mind as an application developer, because I may be dependent on that new feature. And if something rolls back and I'm asking for, let's say I'm calling a stored procedure that doesn't now exist, I could orchestrate my application to roll back in its container as well as the SQL Server to roll back. Do you have real life guidance or practice on that? Maybe it's version control. Is that sort of the
absolutely.
It's all about DevOps, right?
Yeah,
so
DevOps.
You're going to start building custom. What's going to happen in these environments now? Many people are going to start running these containers not just as a SQL container. They're going to build on top of that container with the app, with the scripts, all the dependencies with them, and that's going to come together as a single image now. So in that rollback scenario, it's not going to just be rolling back SQL. It's rolling back to the right container that has SQL, the version of the app, everything that depends on it.
Yep. And the neat thing about this is we're all familiar with Transact SQL. It's a declarative language. Select star from table. I'm assuming that's what all developers do, is just select star from table.
Please don't do that.
No.
Yeah.
Select star from table
Please don't do
1,
that.
select star from
Where
table
Yeah,
2.
exactly.
Where in there?
Where 1 equals 1. So so they do this code, right? And we don't actually say file open, mem commit, file close, hard drive is at this location. We don't do any of that. We just say select F name from table, right? And it does it. It's a declarative language. This is what I want. And so containers are controlled by, of course, a YAML file, just a JSON file or a text file rather. And all you do in there is you declare, I want SQL Server 2019 CU3.
Right.
You just say that. When you hit go, that's what happens. You don't have to say, oh, it's got to be this and you got to install it. You just say, I want that, and that will happen. And in Kubernetes, it goes another step. Then there'll be another YAML file that says, always make sure that's around, 3 of them. And if one goes down, literally it will just stand another one up. You declare what you want, you declare your intent in a text file. So now let's talk about your developer scenario. You tell me, hey Bob, I screwed this thing up really bad. I need you to roll back to yesterday. All you have to say is run this command.
So that will roll back the server, but then what about the data that happened for the last 24 hours?
Beautiful. That's the great story about this.
Yeah, look at him go.
Containers are often run in a shared storage environment, what's called persisted storage. So all of that's attached already to these containers. So the new container that comes up has the right version of SQL, and SQL Server is compatible to switch between cumulative updates for the same set of databases.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
So literally the storage just is the same. When you put the new container on top,
we
it
just
reads it.
switch to the new container, point to the same databases, and you're up and running.
And then the backup plan you talked about is backing up and timestamping the storage, which is independent.
Different storage location. That's correct.
Yeah. It's a great time to be a developer, isn't
It's a
it?
great time to be a
exactly.
dev.
Exactly.
Okay. A few more questions that we have online. Let's see. Let's go to, okay, this one's interesting. How do I decide if SQL Edge is right for my application?
I'll start with that one a little bit. Think in terms about what we're doing with SQL Edge. We're providing a containerized version of SQL Server that is specifically optimized to run on small things. So if you need to run a SQL...
That's IoT. Like
That's
when
IoT,
you say small
right?
things, that's
Again,
that's
think
out
about
in the
like a
world.
drone, or think about like a manufacturing device, think about a Raspberry Pi. We literally took the SQL Server code. I liken it to a movie I saw one time where they were trying to figure out how to take an airplane and launch it off an aircraft carrier that wasn't meant to launch off an aircraft carrier. It's a famous movie, right? So they had to figure out how to rip everything out of this plane to get this thing to take off. And one of it was like they took the guns and put black broomsticks, painted broomsticks, right? In other words, they stripped this down to the bare components to run it and lift it off an aircraft carrier. That's a little what we've done with Edge. We've actually stripped down all the stuff that's not needed to run the core engine to reduce the footprint so it can run on a Raspberry Pi or a small device. So your first decision to make is, do I even need that? Do I need to take the data processing and machine learning capabilities and run it on the device itself, or do I just need to feed telemetry up to the cloud and run it up there? So it all starts with, where does this app need to live? And do you really need data processing capabilities on the edge? One of the reasons why customers said they wanted it, 3M's that example, they have IoT devices that are semi-connected. In other words, they have a lot of telemetry feeding for these, but they can't afford to just send it to the cloud all the time and have something else process it and give them a result. They need to do prediction analysis at the machine itself when it may not be connected to the internet. So what better tool than the SQL Server engine to process data and do machine learning services?
And one of the wonderful things about SQL Edge is we've built in integrations with things like Azure Stream Analytics, IoT Hub, so not only, and new time series capabilities. So if you take a manufacturing environment and you have to do some sort of predictive maintenance, now you can be in a semi-connected or disconnected state and actually make the decisions, deploy your models to the device, and make decisions without being connected.
So would you guys agree, like you're data scientists, you might go take your machine learning models and train them in your workstation or
yeah.
somewhere
Absolutely,
else.
yeah, big iron. We
right?
use big iron
with
for that.
representative data from the IoT devices,
Right.
and then you would push down your models onto this IoT device, and
Correct.
it doesn't have to be connected, and you could run your models.
Yeah, the models are very tiny. Think of an Excel formula almost. That's basically what they end up being, a very tiny binary model.
Right.
To train them, you need terabytes of data. The more data, the better, right? So you don't put that on the device, you train it somewhere else. Think about it for a moment. When you went to school, you learned to read, and they gave you tons and tons and tons of books as you learned to read, but you don't carry those around today. You know how to read. You have a machine learning model in your head of, I know how these words work. That's exactly what we do in IoT. When we're back on the server and we're training it, we're giving it tons and tons and tons of library books. When we take the model, we're just putting just that on the IoT device. A lot of times when you need edge real-time predictions or classifications to make life or death decisions.
You know what? That is probably the best explanation of machine learning that I've heard. It's so simple.
Machine learning for the rest of us? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, machine learning for the rest of us. I'm just going to ask you, can you just repeat that same thing? Literally,
Sure.
like,
You
do
mean
the
the book
reading
analogy.
example again.
The book analogy.
Sure.
The reading.
Yeah, there's even a simpler one. This is, I teach data science around the world, and this is even a simpler one. When we have a child, we show them a cup. Here's a cup, here's a cup, here's another cup. And we show them different kinds of cups. And the child hears us say that word. And then we get another object that isn't a cup, and we say ball or toy. Then we show the child a cup it's never seen. And we say, what is this? And the child says, cup, but it's not a cup. And we say, no, this is not a cup, this is a toy. What is this? Toy? Yes, very good. So that's exactly how machine learning works. We run the data past it, it's pre-scored, we know the answer. And we say to it, this is a cup, this is a cup, this is a cup, this is a cup, that's a ball, that's a toy. And we move forward. Then we show it data it has not seen, but we still know the answer. And this is called test data. And we say, what do you think this is? And it says cup, and we go no, and we penalize it and give it a score. And it says, oh, that one must be, okay, and it learns. Then we can show it randomly later another object and say, is that a cup? And it can say, I'm almost certain that's a cup. That's literally how machine learning works.
I feel like I've been machine learning my whole life.
So I'll throw a shameless plug in here. If you like Buck's explanations and you want more of these types of explanations, Buck and I have actually started a mini series called Something Old, Something New on Data Exposed. And it comes up once a month. We've done about
Six of them almost so far, yeah.
So you can go through and see from a data perspective or a data professional perspective, how can you take those steps towards machine learning? And plus, Buck wears all these crazy
I was going to
math
say,
shirts.
isn't it really I just tune in for the entertainment part of it, actually.
So the something old, something new. The something old is obviously the math. And then Anna shows the code, which is the something new.
Wait, you're not the something?
No. It's the
Old?
math is old and her code is new.
I thought that
What
was-
did you think?
I have no
I thought you were the old
comment
and she was the new.
Oh, okay. If you want to see it right now, aka.ms/SOSN. Something old, something new.
Nice.
Nice. And you are also partnered with us. That runs live on Learn TV. So we get data exposed
Absolutely.
weekly.
Yep.
Learn just keeps giving for us, man.
Yep.
What can I
It's
say?
a great partnership. You have good content. We have good infrastructure.
That's true.
Exactly.
That's true.
That's perfect. Okay. Let's go back to SQL Server and specifically talk about SQL Server not on Azure. So we talk a lot about Azure SQL.
Yes.
What about the future of just SQL Server on-prem, and what love do we have there?
Yeah, in a typical Microsoft fashion.
Yep.
I'll give you a long answer. As you know, we released the latest version of SQL Server in 2019. Funny story, though, is that being part of the engineering team, we always start working on the next version of SQL Server before we ship a version of SQL Server. So we were already starting to think about the next version of SQL Server as we were releasing SQL 19. Obviously, we're here in June of 2021, and you're like, Bob, what's the story? Like, what's going on, right? We always innovate on the product. We talked about how the core engine's the same in the cloud. So what's happening is a lot of things what we're doing is we're investing that show up cloud first, end up on a major release of SQL Server. As it turns out, in the engineering team, if we wanted to, we could build and release SQL Server as a version once a month if we wanted to, but nobody's going to buy that, right? So it's a process of us deciding, have we provided enough value in a release, cumulative together, to warrant a new release of SQL Server? And is it ready from the perspective of that? So stay tuned. We're working on it. We don't have any kind of dates to reveal today, but we're actively discussing it. We do it like all the time. We're actively having that conversation.
Yep. And the underlying question may be, are you trying to move us to the cloud, and are you leaving the on-prem? The answer is no.
Definitely not. Think about also the future is our slide I showed at the very end, right? I'm giving you information about the themes of what we're doing. Imagine a SQL server, like a next version, that is very cloud connected, that's very integrated with the Azure experience. But we talked about things like intelligence, right? And analytics and so forth. We have found that those features, those capabilities are very popular with customers. We talked about modern developers, right? We want to meet to them. So imagine us continuing to iterate on those kind of themes and delivering those kind of capabilities with the future of our product.
All right, next up we're going to put you all three on the spot, one after another.
Okay.
Anna, what is your favorite SQL Server feature?
Oh, favorite SQL Server feature.
It can be cloud too, right? Or is it got to be SQL Server?
I mean, it says SQL Server, but
okay,
we'll
it
take
says
any
SQL
answer.
Server.
You're on the hot seat now.
Ooh,
Yeah,
hot
you were on
seat.
the hot seat, Anna.
Let me think.
I like that. I'd like to see your sweat, actually.
Can we tag back and I'll think about it?
Okay, there you go.
Oh my gosh, what is this,
Too
a
much
wrestling
pressure
match?
going first.
Seriously,
Really?
come on.
All right, Bob, what's your favorite SQL
Oh, I'll go
Server
right at
feature?
it. It's accelerated database recovery. I mean, so
Okay,
can I
now tell us what that is.
Oh yeah, I'll tell. Can I really tell you what that is? Okay.
Yeah, you have 2 minutes.
Here we go. Okay, 2 minutes. Here we imagine. Buck Woody comes in and deletes 1 billion rows in a transaction and causes my business to go down. Anna tries to kill him. I mean his session, and we're still down. And then Pedro Lopes comes along and tries to crash SQL Server, and we're all down for like 5 minutes. And they call me in support and say, what do I do? And I say, use accelerated database recovery, because all those problems go away.
So
That's the explanation.
I would imagine then there's a transaction log somewhere.
There
that
is.
then lets you go back to like a certain point in time.
It's all version based. We're using the power of versions in the SQL database to avoid long recovery and long rollbacks, because we don't want Buck and Anna to bring our business down. That's really what it comes down to.
So it seems like that's not a good enough answer, because at the same time, if I'm a retail environment, other good things happened there. So is it binary? Like if you go back to last Sunday, how do I keep some of the good stuff? Do I have
Here's
to
the deal. This is great. Thank you for asking that question. These versions are not for restore versions. These versions are for changes so that we can undo. When you're ready to undo, we undo.
So
it's
you can
only used, these versions are only used when you need certain versions of information based on locking, or you need to do crash recovery or undo. So imagine the failover scenario we drew for you in our diagrams, right?
Yeah.
That failover, when we come across to even a replica, an AG replica, we're always redoing changes on this replica, but we haven't undone anything that's not committed. Now, because we have versions, the undone happens in the snap of your fingers. So it really improves your uptime.
So what you're saying, I think, is if Buck somewhere last Wednesday deleted 1 billion rows and we just found out about it on Sunday, you could just roll back that one transaction from those deletions from
It's
Buck.
more of a live scenario. Let's say Buck did it on Wednesday, right? And Anna says, oh my gosh, you've blocked the world because you deleted 1 billion rows. We need to roll you back because we got to undo that, right?
Yeah.
So she starts to do it, but we're all down during that operation.
Right.
It's all about availability. Yep. It's about availability during these rollback operations or undo operations for consistency.
Right.
All right, let's take a quick question from the audience.
No, can you repeat that word? Accelerated what?
Accelerated database recovery. So here's one quick answer for you, though. Thank you for mentioning, again, that term. I call it ADR. Guess what in the cloud just works? Just there. You don't even know it's there. But in SQL Server, we're a little more conservative, so you got to turn it on for your given database to use it.
Does it
comes
cost
with SQL
more
19.
to use it, or I'm paying for that with the license of SQL
It comes
Server?
with SQL Server. It's just a database configuration option for SQL 19. And in the cloud, it just works.
Nice. All right, Buck, favorite SQL Server feature?
Oh, machine learning services. Yeah, so the ability to run Python, R, Java in the database in a stored procedure for all the reasons we described. And then one part of that we didn't mention is the predict T-SQL statement, which is part of that,
That's right.
which you don't need to do any of those things. You can simply call this predict statement
in the
and
engine.
off you go.
A
Built
T-SQL
right
statement,
into the
yeah.
engine, very fast.
So go into a little bit more detail on what that predict T-SQL is. I'm imagining some answers, but tell me more what it is.
Yeah, so we showed you the ability to run Python and R, and you have to like start a stored procedure. You put your R code or your Python code, you put it in the stored procedure. It then sends it off to that engine and gets the response back. But somebody had to write the Python and the R code. So now you've got to figure out how to be a data scientist and learn statistics and do all kinds of stuff. You don't want to do that. But you would like to predict things from inside Transact SQL because you're a T-SQL developer. If you have created a model, and we include several, that you have done already, that can be stored as a binary object in a table. And then I can simply say, use that object, send it these things, and give me an answer. One line, predict.
Integrated into the select
Integrated
statement
right into the select statement.
So you hit it right on the head. So as a developer, I'm comfortable with T-SQL. Like, I'm not afraid of that. And
Right.
I know unions, I know selects, I know joins.
Right.
So I'm comfortable making choices there. But I also, like, now I understand a little more machine
It's another
learning
function
from
in
your
T-SQL.
description.
That's what it is.
But I don't know how to write that function.
Right.
So
Nor
that's-
should you, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the
nor
idea.
should you.
We'll
Yeah.
let somebody else have that job.
Yeah, well, they already have it. And so the idea is not, and I want to go back to something you asked a little bit earlier, should I become a data scientist as a DBA? A lot of times we think, oh, I'm a DBA, therefore I must become a BI developer.
Like I have to own everything inside the
Therefore I must,
database.
my next thing is, no, not at all. DBAs are great. Power BI and business intelligence, that's great. The idea of having data science on top of that, that's great. But you don't need to evolve to those skills. Those are separate skills.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
But wait a minute, Anna's on the hook now. Still.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Okay, we got it. We got to do another question.
Too bad.
She gets more time. She gets more time.
It's only available in SQL 2019 above.
So the question was, what versions do we have machine learning services? So in 2016, 17, we introduced
Sorry,
the
16 was R.
for R, the R language.
17 Python.
2017, we added Python. In 2019, we extended this extensibility framework to where you could use other languages. One of the ones we included was Java, but you could add more. You want Go? You can get Go. Anything you like. I'm doing a session just after Anna's today on secure machine learning with SQL Server. You might want to stay for that, and we'll cover that framework in perpetuity. Now, don't walk off.
Yeah, no
Okay.
kidding.
No.
Yeah.
This isn't fair.
We have 4 minutes left, so let's wrap up with Anna.
Sure. So I'm going to take a tangential answer. So
Okay.
my favorite part about using SQL Server is the tools that come with SQL Server.
Sure.
So for example, Azure Data Studio forked off VS Code. It's awesome to use. Very easy to use. Has all these cool extensions like notebook capabilities.
you're the notebook-
Coming from a
She's
data
a
science
notebook
world
person.
and getting SQL notebooks in Azure Data Studio has been an awesome experience. SQL CMD to go to the command line and just connect and run queries and do things like bulk copy and inserts and all that stuff. The tools are just awesome, and the tools community is really great. I love that Azure Data Studio is all on GitHub. So whenever I have an issue, I can go file it, and within, like an hour, someone's saying, hey, we're working on this. Someone says, I've seen this too, or they say, we're going to fix it. Go check the insiders build. So I think the tools is what helps make accessing all the capabilities of SQL Server very accessible.
That's a
and
great answer.
That is a great answer. In
Our tools
fact,
team is watching live going, thank you.
I love our tools team. Yeah.
as a developer, I can think back, I don't know how long ago, but I had one aha moment that literally changed my development career going forward, is when I found out about SQL Server Trace Listener. And I'm like, wait a minute, I can have this disconnected item on the site that's only on when I want, and then it will tell me everything SQL Server is doing. It's almost like that beginning of that transaction log where I got to see that. And that was one of the tools that
Nice.
tremendously increased the value of my SQL performance. Okay, we've got room for one last question, which actually fits into what all three of you are talking about. And it very simply says, what are the monitoring options in Azure for SQL Server? Because I think that ties back to your recovery.
Yep.
It ties back into ML and usage. You don't want somebody spending too much time or money.
Right.
And tooling to actually see the monitoring. So maybe.
Let me start.
Yeah, Bob's got to take
Let me
this
start
one.
with some core stuff, and then I'd like Anna you to comment about some of our new stuff we've done. So this is one of the things I try to emphasize to everybody live here in the room. The power of SQL Server Engine from a monitoring perspective. You just mentioned tracing, right?
Yeah.
All of that is in Azure SQL. Let's take managed instance for a second. You have all the DMVs, the query store, all the X event tracing, everything you need exists in the engine. So all the normal tools just work. But that is inside SQL, right? So that experience you're used to today is going to be available to you. Now, Anna, why don't you talk about some of the new experiences we have outside of SQL?
Yeah, sure. A big new thing that we have is called Azure Monitor for SQL Insights, and this is going to allow you to kind of look at all your, at least Azure resources today, all your Azure SQL resources, VMs, MIs, DBs, even your secondaries if you have an AG deployed in SQL Server on an Azure VM, or if you're using geo replicas, we can identify those secondaries as well. And you can actually see all of the metrics. It's actually really cool. I think we demoed it at some point during this conference.
I'm sure we have.
But if you're online and you want to go watch a video, we do have a deep dive on monitoring with the monitoring PM, Elaine Dormel, on our Data Exposed YouTube
It's pretty
page.
stunning, the amount that's there.
But think about this. So your monitoring experience inside SQL is what you're used to know and love. But you use perfmon today. You're like, where is that thing? Because you don't have access to the OS and paths, right?
Right.
Hence SQL Insights. It has that look and feel, a performance monitor, and it's customizable. It's using Telegraph and Grafana and writing to something called Azure Log Analytics. Even ISVs can then hook into what that looks like and do their own type of visualization. It's a great story.
It's an amazing ecosystem. All right, well, I appreciate your time, Buck and Anna and Bob, please.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks again for joining
Thanks,
us. on
everybody.
RTV.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
you
everybody
online.
online. Appreciate it. Thanks for being
Absolutely.
here today.
Thanks for joining us.
taking the time to be a part of this conference and to join us and interact in all these great sessions. Caruana, I know this is a huge topic and nobody better to cover it than you, so I will pass it over to you. What's new in Microsoft Teams?
Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate it. And hello, everyone, both in the room and online. I'm really happy to be here presenting at this virtual conference. And it being hybrid, it's super exciting to have folks in room and also online. Now, throughout the talk today, please make sure to post your questions in the chat. And I'll leave some time at the end for any questions that happen to be in the room as well. I think the hardest part of this last 16 months of being virtual is I don't actually get as much feedback from the audience as I usually do. And so I really encourage you to, share your thoughts on the chat online and also in the room later. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. If you need to know anything more about me, you can find me on Twitter at Caruana or via my adoption newsletter on LinkedIn. And I definitely encourage you to do that. I have the pleasure of having been with Teams since the beginning, since before our public release. So I've been here a while, and it's great to see how the product has grown over time. Of course, you wouldn't be here without our awesome sponsors. I always like to thank them, especially now. It's been a challenging time for everyone, and we really appreciate their commitment to this community and making sure events like this one continue to live on. And we're definitely looking forward to coming back to the next M365 Collaboration Conference in December in Las Vegas. So I hope to see some of you there as well. As I mentioned, you can always stay up to date on what's happening in adoption, but also across Microsoft 365 with our adoption newsletter that's available on LinkedIn. That is a place where we publish a lot of information around strategic highlights and research and what have you. We alter its publication dates based on US holidays and what have you, but I have another one that's coming out this week. So please go and subscribe on LinkedIn. And if you saw any of the talks that I've given this week, you know that we're really focused on reimagining teamwork, prioritizing employee well-being, and delivering holistic improvements to the organizations that we serve. These three priorities should be your framework or your prism by which you look at all the new features that I'm going to discuss. Features in any technology product are only as good as the scenario they improve. So everybody's going to talk to you about all their new cool features, and Microsoft Teams and modern work at Microsoft is no exception. But I really want all of you to be thinking about how do these features empower you to improve the employee experience, your customer engagement, your relationships with the partners that you use to achieve your business objectives. That is actually what matters, not the technology in and of itself. And so I always like to make sure to remind folks of that when we start to dive into these rapid fire what's new in Teams sessions, because it's really important that you have some scenarios that you're focusing on improving. Many organizations at the beginning of the global pandemic had to do what we call a rapid deployment of Microsoft Teams. That means you turned on the switch and let everyone in so that you could continue operating and communicating and having online meetings. But now is the time to go back and polish that implementation of Microsoft Teams. Think about what you want to get out of this next, and what has your organization learned during the last 15, 16 months. We do a process in my team called a listening session once a quarter, where everyone on the team comes together and shares what they've learned. That knowledge sharing is so important because there's been so many different insights that we've gained over the time that we've been, challenged with this global pandemic. As we go forward, many people are going to be in different states of hybrid work. Some people are returning to their facilities, other people are not. Some people are going to be embracing a hybrid work schedule. And so we really do have to think differently and go from reacting to this pandemic and the changes we've been through to reimagining what the future looks like in these types of scenarios. This is by far not the list of all of them, but it's some of the top ones that we see globally and around the world that are relevant to many organizations. Now, I am going to focus on Microsoft Teams, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, really all of the building blocks of the Microsoft ecosystem are available to you to be able to reimagine that future of work and your business objectives in your own organization. And so while I definitely focus on Microsoft Teams, I coined the term early on, better together. And I really believe that the work that we can do is not only better when we work together as individuals, but when we bring the products together to deliver that value. And nothing is more true about that than what we're doing with the Power Platform team. There's been lots of sessions around this, so I'm not going to deep dive into it, but I want to make sure that you're thinking about how do teams and the capabilities of Power Platform work together to transform those business processes. Everyone now can be a low-code or no-code developer and a maker, and we're really working to make sure that these capabilities are available to folks, even if you're not a professional developer. You know, I'm a semi-pro developer, certainly a low-code, no-code person, and I'm really excited about what we're doing to bring together these capabilities like Power Apps and the Common Data Service into teams, and what we can do with the solutions we can create in those what we call collaborative apps. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about collaborative apps and what that means, and it's really about, you know, continuing to extend those business processes. Power Virtual Agents, another important capability as they exist in teams or in other experiences that your customers might see, and Power Automate to drive workflow improvements and business process improvements across the organization. And so as we think about what Microsoft Teams means to you, we have to think about these other capabilities and what they will do for you going forward. Because I don't know about you, I've been in a lot of virtual meetings in the last 16 months. You know, I've been in a lot of virtual meetings. I've produced a lot of virtual events, all the way from things like Microsoft Ignite and Build to events like this or individual webinars. And, you know, while I appreciate, you know, Microsoft Teams enabling us to stay together, and I'm very grateful for everyone being able to use our product to come together and work done, I also know that there's more to the world than the virtual reality that we've been living in. And now is the time for us to start thinking about how to build these things together as we stay connected, collaborate, and simplify work on this secure and compliant platform that we have available to us. We've done a lot of research on this going forward, and 82% of managers expect to have more flexible work from home policies as we move beyond these initial phases of the pandemic. I'm not sure I'm a fan of the post-pandemic phrase. I know that's what we all want, but I do think that the impact of this event, this global event that we've lived through, is going to live with us. And so there certainly is an after, and I'm happily that we're moving towards that, at least in some regions. But we've proven now that we can all work together when we're apart. But do we stay organized? Do employees feel connected? Can you onboard new team members well? These are some of the questions that we still have to deal with Microsoft Teams. And 60% of people feel less connected to their colleagues since so as people managers and leaders and technologists, we have to figure out how can we use the new features that we're delivering to you to improve that statistic. We want people to feel connected to not only each other in an organization, but the customers that they serve. And so we are really working on prioritizing features that will drive engagement and that can be leveraged in this hybrid workspace that we're going to be in as some of us return to our facilities. Online meetings alone, we know for sure not enough. We've got to move things forward with other capabilities. And so whether that's files and tasks or office apps and whiteboards, devices in meeting rooms, we have to think about the full plethora of capabilities that are available to us as we move forward. And last but not least is the graph, right? The Microsoft Graph is fundamental to being able to extend and build different sorts of experiences, whether you're customizing something from a line of business perspective or accessing that data so that you can show it in a Power App or in an adaptive card. The graph is incredibly powerful. It can be pretty overwhelming when you're first getting used to understanding it, but just know when you hear Microsoft employee or a developer or an MVP talk about the graph, they're really talking about accessing all of the rich data stores that exist in the modern work experience to be able to repurpose it and turn it into actionable data. The data alone is just a pool of information, but being able to turn it into insights and actions and decision points is what is more meaningful for your organization. So I want to show you a quick little video here of the meeting lifecycle reimagined a little bit. And so I'm going to talk through these things afterwards, but let me show you this video and then we'll talk about all the cool meeting features that are coming to you. Ooh, that's a lot of stuff, right? That's a lot of stuff. And so really the focus on meetings and all the meeting innovation that we're doing there is about improving the life cycle, the before, during, and after a meeting. Right? We want people to stay more connected. We want people to be able to share the information that's relevant to that meeting in that meeting and have that information be actionable and discoverable even when people aren't able to join. One of the things that I always tell people, and why we have a certain setting in Microsoft 365, that every meeting be a Teams meeting, is you can't always assume now, even if we're back in the workplace, that everyone is going to be able to join your meeting. So if you add that Teams meeting to every single meeting that you schedule, you'll have chat available. You'll have a place to be able to store files. You can share an agenda. You can share meeting notes and tasks and things that everybody needs to have to be productive. So I really encourage people to think more about the life cycle of a meeting and what it means to be productive in your organization in that way. Meetings as the center of this virtual experience that we've been dealing with, have varying levels of productivity associated with them. And for instance, also you should think about the meeting fatigue of your attendees, right? Not every meeting do you have to have your camera on for. Obviously I do today. I want you to all be able to see me as I present. But there's lots of meetings that I have inside Microsoft where I have my camera off. And that does psychologically reduce the stress on employees when they don't feel like they have to have people either seeing them or seeing into their home or using, one of the backgrounds that we provide. So meeting and calling is definitely an area of continued innovation that we're going to focus on over time. Rich calling features are also coming into this space. Microsoft Teams as a phone system is also, the ability to democratize that accessibility and streamline calling in your organization. And so, it's also something for you to be thinking about, because while inside Microsoft, we don't use our calling features as much as you might think, most of our customers do. And so consequently, having that new experience is important. And by the way, don't think that your feedback isn't heard. We've had some feedback on the new layout of the calling tab within Teams, and we're having conversation right now about how we should respond to it. Your feedback is incredibly important to the way that we prioritize new features inside of Microsoft Teams, and never has that been more clear than what we did with Together Mode and the new dynamic views that are rolling out. And so being able to fight meeting fatigue by bringing people together in a different way online, and being able to eventually customize these experiences as we announced at Ignite and Build is really important. And so think about creating a custom stage that you use with your customers. And the meeting extensibility features that we have will allow you to take different components of a meeting and build it into those third-party applications that you might want to extend. Think of scenarios like a telehealth experience. People aren't coming into the Teams client, but they're using voice, video, and chat services provided by Microsoft Teams in an end-to-end scenario like that. And there's many others that we can discuss. Having these engaging meetings also means having different sorts of layouts that are available. And so we have obviously already launched large gallery view. but more is coming, right? The dynamic views that we'll be able to, you'll be able to enjoy, which we've announced at Ignite and previously, are still rolling out. Not everyone has all of them. But as over the course of the next 6 months, everyone will get like weather person view, and where I could put myself and my content side by side, I could overlay my content, that sort of thing. And so really helping your users know how to use those things effectively is a great theme for your adoption and internal champions. Because, you know, there's so many features in Microsoft Teams that on a regular basis, most people are only using a fraction of them. And so I think our goal should be to help people use the features that are going to improve their experience, and breaking them down by theme with a well-supported Champions program, or you're getting content from the Champions program that Josh and I run. All of that is important as you go forward. Making sure that people have this shared virtual space and can continue to improve the experience, whether using custom backgrounds, background filters, you know, all these different capabilities that exist in the experience today, is going to continue to be extended. And I gave a session earlier today on virtual event best practices, where I went through kind of the decision tree of whether you're going to use live events, a Teams meeting, or webinars. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check out that session or our virtual event playbook online. But, you know, Teams meetings are the heart of that, as well as live events, and giving you that flexibility to make sure that you're creating the kind of experience that people actually want to participate in. Devices are also a key part of this. Now, you might not think that devices were a hot topic right now because we've all been virtual, but you would be surprised that obviously there was an initial surge of people getting a good headset or a good speakerphone like the one that I'm using today. But as we address the hybrid workspace, you'll need to have better conference room setups and setups for people who are actually back in that physical space, to also accommodate collaborating with people who are not joining you from the same physical location. Plus, the way we do business today, even if you're a smaller organization, you might find yourself working with somebody across the country or on the other side of the world. It just depends on the kind of work that you do. So making sure that you're thinking about the types of personal and shared devices that you can use to improve the experience of collaboration is important. Again, we have an entire microsite dedicated to the devices that are available. More are being created every day, some with dedicated Teams buttons that automatically activate the app, and, you know, as the one that I have here today. And, you know, I'm one of those people that, because I do a lot of speaking and I have my show on YouTube or whatever, I have a lot of gear here, but I'm actually just using my puck to speak with you today. And I found in many of this sessions that I've given, this puck is good enough, you know, Sennheiser piece, that it still delivers quality audio. Quality audio is fundamental to the Teams meeting experience and any type of collaboration you're trying to do. People can deal with the video freezing, or even if I had to turn my video off because I had bandwidth constraints here or something. But if my voice starts to go in and out, that's a problem. And we're doing a lot of AI inside of Microsoft Teams to help with noise cancellation and suppressing background noise. And those are new features that are coming into the client as we go forward. And that is really helpful. Because if there was somebody vacuuming outside my office door right now, because I have my noise cancellation on high, you would not hear that. And the work that we're doing and that we'll be releasing on that will be very important. And it'll be accessible by these devices, especially the certified devices that we have from Teams. Now, when we think about meeting experiences, you also need to be thinking about webinars. This is also something that's reasonably new. You should think of a webinar like a Teams meeting with registration that's customizable. And so you have registration and reporting that you can customize. The webinar will scale to up to 1,000 people. You have a lot of organizer and meeting controls, and you can use these new dynamic views I'm talking about to make sure that your webinar is really engaging. An admin does have to enable some of these features, and it is still continuing to roll out around the world. It will be available in GCC and in GCC High, and we're working on it for DoD clouds. And most of the features that I'm talking about today, we are laser focused on closing the gap between our commercial offerings and our government offerings. So if there's anybody out there who does a lot of gov work, just know that this is a key focus. Josh and I and my team, we work on that specifically, gov enablement. And so we have these cloud environments, if you're not familiar with this, called GCC and GCC High, that state and local agencies, federal and civilian agencies will use, as well as an entire DoD infrastructure. And so not all of them have the same feature set for Microsoft Teams. And so we're working very hard to close those gaps and do what we call simultaneous ship. So when things come out for commercial, they will also come out for GCC, and that will enable many of those state and local agencies and international government agencies to use those features more quickly. So webinars is one of those that we pushed on for that simultaneous ship. It is becoming available quickly. And so that's been I'll call it a thorn in the side of our government customers for some time. You come to a session like this and I'll be talking about a lot of things that you can't use. And so we realize that that's been a pain point, and we're working to address that quickly right now. So there's a roadmap here that really talks about the Teams meeting roadmap and what we've done. We've launched breakout rooms, new together mode scenes, dynamic views are rolling out, and these custom layouts that will be available, and then live reactions and polls in your meetings, and these very, very large meeting capabilities that we're rolling out. And so, you know, these new features really represent significant improvements both in the performance and the options that are available in your meeting space. And, you know, I will say that the pandemic definitely influenced our roadmap. These things were all on the table prior to the pandemic. However, the speed with which we had to land these innovations, especially for friends in the education sector, like with breakout rooms, for instance, or, you know, doing moderations and having more control, has been, you know, obviously accelerated because of the pandemic. So if you are in the EDU space, there is an EDU roadmap that is specific to you, additional features that are coming out, whether you're in K through 12 or higher education. There's a large portion of the usage of Microsoft Teams is in education. If any of you are parents out there, you probably had to have your kids log into a Teams meeting for their virtual school. Obviously, we all want our kids back in school, but it has been helpful to understand the difficulties of using Teams in that scenario. And a part of the difficulty has been empowering the IT pros who serve in that industry. You might be in a school that's very far from the central IT professionals who manage that district's infrastructure or policies. And so we've learned a lot from it. We're continuing to innovate there. And many of the new features that we're writing for breakout rooms will be or influenced by the feedback that we've gotten from the education sector as we've had to support them during this challenging time. So I do want to check the chat. Josh, is there any questions that I should answer before I move on?
You are good in the chat right now.
Okay. Well, I do want to make sure that everybody, I think Josh, you have to mute so I don't echo. There we go. Thank you. I do want to make sure that everybody is clear about the place to stay up to date on these features. I'm showing you now the Microsoft 365 roadmap site. And what I've done is I've come into the site and I've filtered it for Microsoft Teams. And in doing so, I'm able to see the things that are in development, what is rolling out, and what has launched. I've checked this box for what is rolling out, and you can see that there are 63 features that are rolling out. And I really encourage you to give feedback on this site. You know, we've gotten a lot of feedback about it, and we continue to try to improve it. I think there's, you know, more that we can do, but you see this little feedback button down here. Please give us your feedback. You know, I read that, the people who manage the site read it, and we're using it to make sure that we can deliver more value to you from these sorts of experiences. But it is the place that we do all of our updates, and this drives a good deal of the content that you would see in the message center in your own your own Microsoft 365 tenant, and that information, which of course can be linked to Planner and Teams as I have a video on my channel. I'm going to click on one of these items here so that you can see a little bit more detail Again, it gives us, it's just some additional information, but this last modified date is important. This particular item on dynamic views, which are rolling out now around the world, was last modified on May 4th. And so sometimes looking at those modification dates is important because it lets you know if we've made a change to the schedule of that particular item. This was actually added to the roadmap back in July of 2020. So plenty of information to be found there. I realize that sometimes the format of this can be frustrating, but go ahead and download it if you want to manipulate it in a different way, and that will help you stay up to date along with the information coming from the Message Center. All right, now let's move on and talk about apps and workflows. So Microsoft Teams is certainly more than chat and meetings, so it is a very dynamic and exciting part of our product. But if you think about your day from a user perspective, from an employee perspective, yes, they're having meetings and talking with people and having chats and reading emails, but they're also trying to get work done. And apps are a very important part of the Microsoft Teams experience. If you happen to be in a tenant right now that still has our first-party Microsoft apps turned off in Microsoft Teams, I implore you to talk to your IT pro, your tenant admin, to turn those apps on. Teams, without the other Microsoft apps, like Word and PowerPoint and tasks and things of that nature, you're really limiting the effectiveness and the productivity capabilities of the tool. And I do still find some customers who have things turned off. Now, obviously, you may want to turn off some of the third-party apps that we have also included because you may not want your users to use them. But I encourage you to take a look at those third-party apps or ask your end users which they're using already, because I'll guarantee you that they're probably using at least one or two of them already. And you may need to make some decisions about that from a company, a governance perspective. But the app experience is really improving, and being able to add apps in meetings, being able to add apps in chat and in your teams, which you've always been able to, but also in your one-on-one chats, allows you to, again, extend the productivity experience that you're having. There's a lot of work that we're doing in this place, in this particular area, because also we find that we want to make sure that we can reduce the meeting fatigue and the change fatigue that end users have. And that's why we talk all the time about context switching. Now, when I have to switch out of Teams and go to a browser, out of Teams and go to my deck, or out of Teams and go to Outlook, all of those things are a load on me neurologically and contribute to my fatigue at the end of the day. So if I can stay in Teams and get things done, that actually helps me as an employee be more effective. So turning messages into actions with apps and workflows directly in your chat is something that we're very excited about. I myself had a hand in being able to release the feature of turning a chat into a task. If you have tasks turned on, I'm so excited by that because it really helps my workflow to be able to then have a planner that has all of my follow-ups from chat across the experience that is available today. Through that ellipses menu on a chat in Teams. And so you'll see more of this happening where the apps can actually be accessible directly in the conversation, so you can turn that conversation into an action. Part of the feedback we've gotten on Microsoft Teams is that it's difficult to have a workflow with all the chats in different places. And so we've absolutely heard that. That was certainly my experience. And so we'll continue to release features that help you make your chats and conversations actionable as you go through the process. And also continue that into meetings as you're able to add apps directly into meetings and follow up. And this particular one uses Asana as an example. That's one of those third-party apps that is so popular in the ecosystem. And again, it's available because from an IT pro perspective, this app has been made available to end users. You can also do that by groups. So maybe you have a group of designers who use Asana together or Adobe Creative Cloud or what have you. You could have those apps be available to a group of individuals and not available to everyone in your organization if you want to manage licensing in that way. Low-code solutions that are also created. Remember at the beginning, I talked about the Power Platform, and these low-code solutions are actually able to be accessed and created from within Teams. So this is a quick demo of a flow being created right inside, a Power Automate flow being created right inside of Microsoft Teams. Again, that just reduces context switching. Of course, I go and work in the Power Automate portal directly in my web browser an awful lot. There's no doubt about that. But for very simple things or simple edits to Power Automates that I already have provisioned, being able to get to it right inside of the team where I'm working in it is quite useful. The same thing is true with Power Apps and being able to build and edit them there. Again, another scenario where I often work in the portal itself. I usually use these features more for editing than building, but you certainly can build now directly within the Teams client, and we definitely see that as an improvement. And the same is, of course, true with those virtual agents and bots. So, the idea here, you can see a theme, right? There's a theme that basically says, do your work in Teams, have the things you need to do be available to you in the flow of your workday. And that extends also to our strategy about our employee experience platform, Microsoft Viva. Having those capabilities like Viva connections and your intranet available inside of Teams. Again, it reduces that context switching fatigue that so many of us have been dealing with. And the custom app integrations continue that with our Teams toolkit and Visual Studio. So the idea of improving the developer experience for Microsoft Teams is also very important, because if you have developers in your company, you want to make sure that they are using this Teams toolkit and Visual Studio, which speeds their ability to build applications and pull in Teams capabilities into the work that they're doing. And so, the SharePoint framework, this has been around. I mean, I started out in this space as a SharePoint subject matter expert. The SharePoint framework is incredibly important in terms of the way that we build and design apps in the Teams space, and also have them available in other experiences. And so, many people around the world use the SharePoint framework, and making sure that you can integrate those SharePoint framework solutions properly in Teams with a bit more of a robust experience than we originally launched is another thing that we've been talking about a lot and continuing to land. So, as we think about the types of integrations that are happening, it's important for you to just kind of understand this grid. There are ready-made apps from Microsoft and other providers that you can turn on in your Teams experience that will extend collaboration, communication, and productivity. There are low-code apps and workflows that come from the Power Platform space that you can configure for your own business process improvement. And then there are full code custom solutions that can be built to extend and improve processes or applications if you have either those people in your organization or you're contracting with a supplier who does this sort of work for you. So this is kind of the slide as like one-stop shop. But I will tell you that top line is absolutely essential. Certainly what we call 1P apps, apps designed and built by Microsoft, are absolutely fundamental and important to the full Teams experience. So if you hit that plus in Teams in your channel and you don't see any apps, go and talk to your IT professional and your tenant administrator to get, at a minimum, those turned on. And then you can begin the conversation about other apps that are created by other providers like ServiceNow or Adobe or Poly that can be so helpful in having a meaningful experience. I will tell you, though, that a lot of organizations, they actually do that a little bit backwards. They'll start with the 1P apps from Microsoft, and then they'll hop down to Power Automate, and they'll start to use some flows or a virtual agent or show some dashboards in Power BI, and then they'll come back to the third-party ecosystem and start using things like Poly or ServiceNow, because they've started to understand the changes in the business processes that can be created by leveraging apps inside of Teams. It's a very, very common scenario there. This is important also because, there are many types of employees in an organization, and some people will never sit at a desk, right? If you are an insurance adjuster, if you are, a volunteer coordinator, if you are out there dealing with the disaster response in any way, or you're in healthcare, You're not sitting down someplace like I do every day to do your work. You are what we call that first line workforce. And the first line workforce, has been the essential workforce over the course of the last 16 months. And we really want to make sure that those folks, whether they're on a manufacturing floor or they're out in the field, have access to the information that they need. We have multiple solutions around this that are available. But I encourage you to think about what are those fundamental things that you want your first line workforce to know and understand. It's usually access to communications and tools. And that's kind of the company out to the first line workforce scenario. But where things really get powerful is when you think about what do those first line workers need to tell you. We were talking the other day about a scenario in which, an insurance adjuster is going out to survey damage at a particular location. And these capabilities can be used so that the images that adjuster takes from that particular site can automatically be attached to that claim and brought back into, the core team that is managing that claim. So it's a bi-directional capability that Microsoft Teams offers, especially when you start to include things like workflows, adaptive cards, and Power Platform capabilities. So you can start by making sure that all your first line workers can, join a town hall or get some training or request time off. But I encourage you to think about how can you transform that experience of them telling you what you need to know. First line workers are the folks who are the first line of your organization. They are out there, they are with your customers, they are dealing with people, and as the boots on the ground, they are usually the people who know what is happening first. But that information sometimes does not get to folks back in headquarters fast enough. And so in many scenarios and organizations around the world, we've been helping people to close the gap between when first line workers know information and when the people who are actually making decisions with that information have it. And that's why using things like walkie-talkie, video calls, and other capabilities are so important. And we continue to do innovations around modern shift scheduling, and pairing together shift scheduling with conditional access can make sure that you can rest easy that people are not accessing data when they are off shift, which is of course a violation of many state, local, and federal regulations. And so using those two things together is very important. But it also gives you that quick ability to do things like shift swapping and just seeing an overview of making sure that you have coverage. You can also use shifts for things like, people who are on a support duty. We use support shifts for DRI in a DevOps scenario, designated responsible individual. When is that person on shift to handle incidents? So shifts can be used beyond the first line experience. But they do provide that capability to manage on and off time, especially with conditional access. And task management, I don't know if you have tried tasks in Teams yet, which is the evolution of Planner and the integration of To-Do, but it's fantastic. And yes, I am biased because I do work on this, but I love the ability to publish tasks. Especially in a retail scenario. Some of you know I used to work for Skechers, and retail, technical enablement was part of what I did. And so being able to say, hey, region 4, store 5, here's a set of tasks that I need you to do to change that window display, and being able to do that at scale for all the different stores that may be available is really game changing. And so the task publishing capability is reasonably new, but available today. And there's lots of information about that, both on Coffee in the Cloud, but also, of course, at support.microsoft.com and our docs infrastructure to tell you how to set that up. So it's really powerful what you can do there with that. And of course, recognizing engaging people by integrating Yammer into Teams really starts to build more of a connected feeling across your first line workforce. And though many of us have been virtual, the first line workforce has always been out there. They've always been away from maybe the hub of where actions were happening. And so making sure they feel engaged, and importantly, making sure they can share knowledge is essential. So I'm showing you some areas where we've had some recent feature releases, and we have more coming, but I really want you to take a look at what's available today. what you can do today in these kinds of scenarios. We're going to keep releasing more improvements in shifts, more improvements in first line connectivity and things of that nature, and more connectors for the low code, no code development. But right now, today, you can improve the experience of your first line workers by leveraging some of these capabilities. And, I would be remiss also if I didn't talk about harmonizing productivity and well-being with the right kind of insights. And so, depending on where you may be around the world, you may be further into this conversation than others. But My Analytics and Workplace Analytics give employees the ability to see their own behavior. So this is not about you as a people manager looking to see when people are working. That is not what this is about at all. This is about me as an individual understanding what can I do to make sure that I have good work-life balance? It can tell me when I need to take a break. I can do things like use the meeting settings in Exchange to make sure that there are breaks at the beginning of each meeting. Who are the people that I collaborate with the most? Am I making sure I'm getting up to move, as I often forget to do? So these are tools that we can build inside of Microsoft Teams that really will help people have more insights about their own behavior. Now, of course, the people who report to me, I get to understand that they're communicating with each other as well, but it's aggregate information. So it's not, I'm not overseeing an individual. I'm taking a look at the health of my team to make sure that there's cross-team communication. And is there anybody that I need to make sure really feels more brought into the mix? So I'm going to switch topics a little bit, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we released at Microsoft Build at the end of May that are relevant to this audience, and there was a lot. So if you saw some of the Build keynotes, you may have heard some of this before, but many of you may have not. And so I wanted to go over some of, I didn't take all of that content, but I took some of the content that I felt would be important for this audience to understand. This is a little bit of an overview of the enhancements that we've done to both the developer experience, but also to application management, security, and compliance. One of the big blockers for people using some of the applications that are available, those third-party apps I was referring to, is really making sure that they are healthy and that they can manage them and what have you. We needed to do some work in this area, and we are. But first and foremost, it's all about that Teams toolkit that I mentioned. So if you do any sort of low code or Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio type of development, you should have the Teams toolkit. I'm a big fan of Visual Studio Code. It is open on my desk 3 days out of 5 so that I can edit different things. And so, having that Teams toolkit is incredibly useful. And that's what we're trying to do. This is the second version of it that we've recently released. So it is very new, but it adds additional capabilities to us, as well as changes to the developer portal that we have done. And so, the developer portal now is a much more developer-friendly experience, I will say. It's more along the standards of what happens in other Microsoft experiences. And so this is kind of part of the process of Teams growing up, right? And really being a first-party part of the Microsoft ecosystem. And so you'll see this over time as new features come along. We did that recently with the launch of public preview and changing the way that we describe our early rings for people who do early adoption programs. We now match the terminology that is done across the rest of Office. And you'll see more things like that happening as we continue to become even bigger part of that existing family. Now, one thing, I have another video I want to show you, and this is really important. This is about adaptive cards. So I'm going to go ahead and show this video and then talk about it a little bit. Adaptive cards are basically the way you can continue to extend those business processes. And we have some of the coolest tools that are available so you can see how to build these adaptive cards. And they're much richer than they were before. And so, the idea is that you can take information from wherever in the system and extend it so that it shows up in Teams on your iOS device, on your Android device, on a web page someplace, but you can still interact with it in Teams. And adaptive cards are a fantastic way, if you are a low-code or no-code developer, to get started. So you can visit the extensibility library on adoption.microsoft.com, and we'll put the link to that in the chat. You can visit that and then go out and find the samples and really get started right online with creating some of these adaptive cards. And adaptive cards are great for workflow improvements, approvals, expense report approvals, and we have a whole list of samples that are available that you can use. And so I'm really excited about those adaptive cards and what they do and what they can do as you think about the way you want to change your processes. But you also want to make sure that you have notifications and other information. Now, this is not available yet. This is coming in June. Well, June is now, but later in the month. But we wanted to make sure that there were better notifications from administrators of custom apps. And so we have improved this process. And this is one of those announcements we made at Build amongst many others. But I wanted to show it because it's important if you're creating apps to be able to share information about them and what happened. Is it being submitted for your approval? Like, what is that workflow? And we didn't have all of that previously. So this is work from the team based on customer feedback, as is the Microsoft 365 certified app capabilities. And so this is a deeper discussion. There's a whole blog post on this. But just know that Microsoft is going to be certifying different apps and their capabilities so that you can have more confidence about the apps that you find in that catalog. We heard clearly from customers that they were concerned about turning on some of these apps because they didn't know them, right? And we show the apps in our catalog, but we didn't certify them all, over the course of time because we're not the app publisher at Microsoft. So now we're addressing that by creating this certification process that apps can go through, and I'm really happy for this to finally launch. We've been talking about it for some time. So that's going to enable you to have confidence about the apps that carry that M365 certification as we go forward. You can also customize apps so that there is an easier method for people to understand what the app is for. And so this is available today. And you can do this in the app portal that is in the Tenant Administration Center. And so maybe you yourself created an app that is for your own, time off application or something of that nature. So being able to customize the apps, even the ones that we have provided from Microsoft, some of the solutions that we publish that you can install, you can change the look and feel of it. You can change the icon color, things of that nature. And so obviously that's a request that we've had a lot. That is available today if you edit the packages. Like if you're using the Champions Management Platform that we have just released to make sure to manage your internal Champions program, you can change the icon. You can change the colors and what have you, but you do have to edit it and edit the code. This provides a user experience right in the Tenant Administration Center that allows you to do that without having to do anything from a code or VS Code perspective. So, that was a lot of stuff, and I know I'm coming to the end of my time with you, but I wanted to also share another thing. Microsoft, beyond being a commercial entity, obviously, is also very invested in accelerating different industries. We are releasing Microsoft Industry Clouds that are tailored for specific industries. We've already released retail, and we've already released our vaccine management solution and our return to work solution, and more is coming. And so what this does is it takes all of the goodness of the modern work and Microsoft ecosystem and configures and tailors it based on scenarios we've heard from our core customers in those specific industries. And so this is very similar to what we've done in education, where we have features like assignments and the assignment notebook that's specifically for education that you would not find in a commercial implementation. So we've done the same thing for healthcare and financial services and retail. Nonprofit is coming, and you can still build on and customize these cloud experiences, but it will just get you that much closer to what you actually need. to reduce the overhead of having to build custom solutions for your particular scenario. I am really excited about this. I've been in the industry space a long time, came from the legal industry, done a lot of industry specific work, and the subject matter experts that we've got in these various industries from the customers themselves and inside Microsoft are really impressive. And I'm thrilled about the acceleration that this is going to represent for these very important industries. And so it doesn't lock you in to a particular way of working. If you want to change something, why, you certainly can. But again, those needs-based solutions, the accelerators that we're landing, the broader ecosystem of partners who have expertise in this space, and the actual industry cloud tenants that you can provision will get you that much closer to making sure that you get what you need from Microsoft 365. Any of this stuff, anything that I've talked about today that you have questions about, we are here to help. We really do have the best community in tech. All of you make up that community, and all of my colleagues at Microsoft, we're so lucky to be able to share it with you. Their support, inspiration, and knowledge about everything I have talked about in our team's community, in the Microsoft tech community as a whole, and the entire Power Platform community is available to you. And so it's a community, it's all of us that are going to bring together the atoms of the physical world with the bits of the digital. This is a quote by Satya from a recent conference. It really struck me, but it really is about us. It's about our experience, whether it's the customer, the organization, our leaders, or us as employees. We have to make sure that all of the kinds of features that I've showed you today are aligned to improving the experience of those humans. And then we're really using tech for good. So I hope this whirlwind of information was useful and helpful. And of course, we'll share all of this with you on the conference site. But I'm really grateful to the conference organizers. I love participating in this, and I am super excited about coming in person in December to Las Vegas. And so, with that, I think I'll turn over back to our chat and see if I have any questions, Josh, that I should be addressing.
You were good in the chat as well, Caruana. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Let me see, there's one little question here. Will the keynote sessions be available on the conference site? I hope so. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I show up and do my thing, and Shirley and everyone else takes care of that, but I do believe so. But again, a lot of this content is available. This is actually new compilation deck that I put together just for this conference, but you will see more of this on our channel on YouTube, Coffee in the Cloud, and everywhere else. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure that you have access to all of the tools and assets that you need. Make sure to visit that Microsoft 365 roadmap site, and that will keep you up to date on a lot of the things that are happening. All right. Well, if no one has any questions, I really hope that this was useful. It's always difficult to, not always see everyone, but I hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you so much, and I will see y'all very soon. I'll give you a little bit of time back, Josh.
Thank you very much, Caruana, and thank you to everybody that attended. We'll see you later.